Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to episode 67 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Did you miss me? Well, I've been away for a little bit of time. I'll share a little bit of an update on why that was. But at the same time, so much has changed and we got a lot to cover today. So as always, if you're new to the Bitcoin Hard Talk, today we're going to be discussing everything about the executive orders, their impact on Bitcoin and crypto, the impact on macro, and the impact on geopolitics. Now we have a new president of the United States that pretty much came in with a bang. And if you're familiar with previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that a lot of what I said and asked, he's done already. Or at least he's made executive orders, and now the legislative process takes over and the hard work begins. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're covering the impact on us, because regardless of what the bureaucrats and politicians do, wherever you are in the world, you want to be preparing for a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. Because despite the fact that Trump wants all Bitcoin to be made in America, it will never all be made in America, because Bitcoin is for us. It's for all of us globally. And while America needs Bitcoin, Bitcoin does not need America. But if America wants to use Bitcoin in order to stay relevant in the world as the world reserve power, then we might actually transition to a world of a little bit more peace, because we can use it in order to defund the proof of weapons network using peaceful proof of work. And we're going to be discussing all of that today, but I got a lot to cover because I've been away for a while. And let's jump straight in. So for those of you new to the show, my name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 2 decades of my life obsessing over the topic of Bitcoin investing, money, and monetary reform. And this is Hard Talk about the hardest form of money, where each week, now I'm back, we go through everything that happened this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics. So let's do a quick intro, and then we're going to cover this week in Bitcoin. And it was a wild week. So firstly, the main topic of everything, as I've said, if you're just tuning in, is Trump has issued a series of executive orders. Now, these executive orders, this is not a monarchy. It doesn't mean that they happen. It means that it now goes through the congressional process in order to make it happen. And that is a political process, and that takes time. I gave up working with politicians a long time ago when I was severely disappointed, tried to make Bitcoin legal tender in the UK, then Isle of Man. And it wasn't until El Salvador did it with President Bukele almost, what was that, 2013 I started on the dealing with governments and Bitcoin. Almost 12 years ago. But Trump has issued a series of executive orders. We're going to be going through those, the impact on all the different areas. We'll criticize where it needs criticism, and we'll praise where praise is deserved. And one of the areas that definitely needs praise is one of the soldiers, the Bitcoin soldier that went down thanks to the proof of weapons network, was Ross Ulbricht. And he has done his 10 years, and now he is reunited with his family now that President Trump has issued a pardoning that allowed him to not spend the rest of his life in prison for creating a website that allowed people to transact online peer-to-peer using freedom money like Bitcoin. And he was held responsible for what they were doing with those money. And if you haven't watched the film Silk Road, you'll know that there was also an FBI part to it where the FBI tried to steal all the Bitcoin. And now the Bitcoin is in the US government Department of Justice's hands. And Trump is looking at making that a strategic stockpile of the US government. Freedom money may be able to be used by United States in order to free America from the Federal Reserve, create a smaller government, and get back to the Constitution, which it deviated from in 1913 when the European banksters took over the dollar with the formation of the Federal Reserve. And I also just want to give a little bit of an update. I'm still feeling slightly under the weather. During the Christmas period and throughout January, I received some personal news which needed for me to take a time out. If you're following me on X, you would maybe know about it if you saw the message. But I did receive the news that sadly my mother passed away. And so I needed to take care of some affairs and take some time out, realign, recognize what's important in the world. And I took some time out, and I was feeling a little bit under the weather as well. And so my throat is hurting a little bit. I'm recovering from, that took a little bit out of me. But your wealth is also your health. And so I had to take that time out, but I'm slowly getting back. And I appreciate all of the comments and everyone saying that they have been looking forward to this episode of Bitcoin Hard Talk. So if you miss me, then I will read the comments, and it inspires me to do more and make sure that more and more people are getting into Bitcoin. So let me know in the comments section on YouTube if you're happy to see this back. And I appreciate all your comments and helping me get through that challenging time. So with that said, let's jump right into this week in Bitcoin. So this week, as of the 20th of January, 2025, the Biden administration, Genocide Joe and Holocaust Harris have left us, and immediately Trump put on pressure in order to progress some of the geopolitical side. You'll know that I've been very critical about the geopolitical side, but you also know that I said that Trump is the way to move forward, because we cannot allow those that engaged in the genocide in order to get away with it. And he was punished. And so that is good news. And now we discuss what happens next. But immediately we got change, we got impact, and we're going to go through all of that. So let's focus on the Bitcoin side first. So this week in Bitcoin, basically Trump said that America at the World Economic Forum would become the crypto capital of the world. And to be quite frank, everything he is doing is making himself and the America the crypto capital of the world, in direct contrast to a phone call that President Trump had with President Bukele of El Salvador yesterday, when most people thought they were going to be discussing Bitcoin, but no, it was going to be about immigration, is my prediction. I didn't get to sit in on the call, obviously, but my prediction is that Trump would have called Mr. Bukele and said, hey, Mr. Bukele, we're doing mass deportations. You know those Salvadorians that came over the border, and because there was a resistance that led to the creation of the M13 and they covered all their faces with tattoos, yeah, we're sending them all back to El Salvador. So get ready. And Bukele would have said, no problem. The ones that were involved in criminal activities, we'll send them into prison. And the rest of them, we will reintegrate into a homicide-free environment. And they'll be happy to come home, because El Salvador is now Bitcoin country. Whereas Mr. Trump, you're creating crypto country. And crypto country has been taken over by the crypto lobbyists, whether it be Brad Garlinghouse of Ripple Labs pushing an XRP agenda, or the different types of lobby groups that are printing the equivalent of fiat currencies on blockchains in order to bribe and make sure the crypto lobby is using their particular flavor of what they printed and pre-mined. But this is what America is now. It is the crypto capital of the world, which means anything goes. And what has Trump got? He's got his collection of NFTs. He's got his DeFi platform. He's got his governance token. He's got his stable coin backed by US treasuries. He's got his meme coins. His wife's got his meme coin. And he will be profiting from all areas that benefit from the crypto lobby, while Bukele is fighting against the International Monetary Fund and the dollarization of his economy by making Bitcoin legal tender and saying, screw you to the IMF and screw you to the system, and eventually, hopefully, being able to restructure his debt. I am very upset that he had to capitulate and take on $3.5 billion of IMF money, but immediately it was met with a larger purchase of Bitcoin as soon as the restructuring went through. And it had to do a bit of a reversal, saying that Bitcoin has to be optional rather than compulsory, which is fine. That is in line with the Bitcoin ethos. And I believe at one of the previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, I covered this anyway. But anyway, Trump went on the stage at the World Economic Forum, some epic speeches, let's say, some things triggering, some things epic. But he was on the stage at the World Economic Forum saying that Bitcoin, not Bitcoin, he's not really using the word Bitcoin, crypto and AI is going to be the strategic move forward for the United States of America. And what have we been preparing you for? A world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. We'll give some more updates on that as well. He also issued an executive order to introduce a crypto SAR. And that crypto SAR is David Sachs. And they will be working on setting up a working group to make sure that America is the crypto capital of the world and that vision moving forward. And so the first task is to set up that working group. And that working group will be working on a regulatory capability and basically to be looking into crypto and stable coins. Now, the interesting thing about this working group is it did not include any representatives from the Federal Reserve or FDIC. We know that FDIC are the financial terrorists that take over the non-clearing banks that are not shareholders in the Federal Reserve, that have to build on top of the clearing banks that created the creature from Jekyll Island in order to take over the dollar for the profits of the private banking system. And so any bank that wants to be gobbled up into the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, like JP Morgan, the FDIC can just take over their banks like Silvergate, like Signature, like Silicon Valley Bank, after a well-orchestrated Operation Choke Point 2.0 in order to use interest rates to push the financial apartheid and crash those banks and say, hey, we're taking over your bank and we're gobbling it up into JP Morgan or some other shareholder of the Federal Reserve. Well, neither of those are included. So that is a good sign. You know, this is a Treasury order, and I've always been predicting that there is going to be a lot of friction between the Federal Reserve and Treasury as more and more wealth inequality happens within America, because you have extreme popularism on the left and right, and you have the right rigging the system through lobby groups, and you have the left begging for communism because they're indebted and slaves to the system because their assets are not appreciating while their wages are increasing at a lower rate to inflation. And inflation is misreported through consumer price index because the basket of assets is dollar denominated into this appreciating asset relative to other currencies because it is the world reserve currency. So that makes the rich richer, the poor poorer within America. And when we cover the macro section, it creates this massive demand for dollars relative to other currencies, which causes all the conflicts that we're seeing in the geopolitical section. But anyway, stable coins will be big on the agenda because stable coins is in direct conflict to a central bank digital currency. If you want to wipe out the banking system and replace fractional reserve credit creation with a deleveraging, then you can issue a blockchain asset and you can back it by US treasuries and other assets. That's what stablecoins like Tether and USDC do. They give everyone a digital dollar that they can use, and they can send it as easy as sending an email. Those that benefit from like staking, for example, they get all the transaction fees from staking their ETH, where many of these networks of stablecoins exist. And you create this system where those that control the ETH control the governance of the network, and it allows for central banks to issue central bank digital currencies where you hand over the profits from the dollar to the Federal Reserve, or you can have a technocrat where private companies issue stable coins, but they deleverage the banking system. And so the Federal Reserve will always want to regulate that. And obviously, the Fed will come in and say, hey, we can't have non-shareholders of the Federal Reserve benefiting from the dollar. And we can't have a deleveraging without a monetary reform, because then you'd have to increase the bank reserves as debt is paid off. And that debt could be paid off with stable coins, which is the real solution for replacing the $36 trillion of debt with a non-fractional reserve banking system. But then that would remove the shekels of the Federal Reserve and reduce the amount of tax that Americans need to pay. So obviously, when they work so hard to get that system, they won't reverse that. So there is going to be really interesting set of regulations. And if it becomes trivial for you to go from your bank deposit to stablecoin, that exposes the proof of weapons network, could create systemic risk. And so the Federal Reserve will want to work that in direct conflict. But the Treasury will say, well, why are we lending to the Fed? Why are you creating a central bank digital currencies backed by our assets and we're paying interest? And then you're benefiting from that, and that increases the amount of tax. Why don't we just issue it ourselves? So monetary reform, as I always said in my book, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust, is inevitable, predictable, and guaranteed as we transition to these different models. Stablecoin regulations is at the forefront of monetary reform, which is why they're going to be regulating it first. And look out for the fight. We'll cover everything as it happens. They have also, as I said, we got the presidential pardon. This was a great one. It didn't happen within the first 24 hours, so people were nervous. Everybody held him to account. The pressure was applied, and Ross Ulbricht, who created the Silk Road website, is now free as a gift to the Bitcoin community, as a token that the President Trump is listening to what people want. And this was a real Bitcoin, movement. And this is great to see. And seeing the pictures of him reuniting with his wife and his family was just really nice to see. He served his time. Now time to move on. And I've been sharing some of the videos and messages that he's been saying as well. Now, what happened as well? Well, we had a SEC crypto task force executive order set up. And that is going to be led by Hester Peirce, who is somebody that has been working on pushing pressure from within the SEC against the corrupt politicians or the corrupt SEC officials like Gary Gensler, who operated Operation Choke Point 2.0 as an implant for the Federal Reserve that also allowed Americans to lose billions of dollars by meeting SBF and constructing a regulatory environment that led to billions of dollars of corruption within the crypto market from the fake crypto banks like FTX. And so out with the old, in with the new. Gary Gensler is gone. Hester Peirce is stepping in to set up this SEC working group, as it were. And she's got more experience than anybody around what effective regulation should look like, not to protect SBF and Gary Gensler and the Fed, but to protect consumers. So I hope this is a change in policy. We also saw Cynthia Lummis, who has been really pioneering the bill for the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve within America. She is going to be leading a digital assets subcommittee on digital assets. And obviously, there's an element of pragmatism when you're involved in politics, that you don't know necessarily whether it's going to be Bitcoin or crypto. America wants to be the crypto capital. And so rather than doing what Bukele in El Salvador did, where they said, we're focusing on Bitcoin first, and then we're having a virtual asset regime for securities and various other things, the word is going to be digital assets, and Bitcoin will be encompassed into digital assets. And we'll see what that looks like from the perspective of digital assets moving forward within America. We also had, I just want to explain as well, because some people were thinking this is like a monarch where, the king or the queen issues these executive orders and they happen. This isn't what the Proof of Weapons Network has been doing within countries like Saudi Arabia and Lebanon and Jordan and Iran, where they've essentially overthrown democracies in order to use the Proof of Weapons Network and CIA covert operations to ensure that they have dictatorships in charge so that they can bribe them and have America first policy to destabilize the region and make sure that oil is used to prop up the dollar, rather than what happens in Iran, where oil was used to get out the Brits that created British petroleum using Iranian oil. And therefore they were overthrown, and the democracy was overthrown and replaced with a monarch. This isn't like that. This is that it has to go past Congress in order to actually happen. But there is an executive order, which means that they are in breach of the laws if they don't push through these things. But remember, Biden issued an executive order, and I did. If you're a member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, you can actually go back to the Biden executive order where I went through everything that was in that executive order and how it was pushing for really a central bank digital currency type of agenda. And this is very, very different to that. So just to explain what this is not. So the crypto executive orders, they're not a ban on central bank digital currencies, but there was an executive order for the working group to explore a ban on central bank digital currencies, which would mean that at least for the purposes of the Trump administration, that the Fed cannot issue a central bank digital currencies as a tool like they launched quantitative easing, which has been a mechanism for getting the government deeper in debt. The government loves it because they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and America ends up paying the bill for the $36 trillion of debt. And the Federal Reserve gets to issue a 6% dividend to its shareholders and have a monopoly on the creation of the digital dollar by a Ponzi scheme called credit creation, where the private banks create the dollar every time they issue a loan. This would essentially say that the Federal Reserve cannot issue war on the private banks if it wanted to wipe out all the banks by hiking rates, having an agenda to say, we're going to show you who's in charge, Trump. We'll hike rates, we'll ruin your economy because the Fed is in charge. And then that can ruin the economy and then lead to a new tool being implemented. And that tool could be a central bank digital currency, which could be a way of taking away the monetary credit creation system from the private banks and the shareholders of the Federal Reserve and just centralizing it to the Federal Reserve, in direct violation of the constitutional ability for America to have their own digital dollar to reduce the amount of tax that Americans pay. And so this prohibits that from happening. And so this, for at least for the purposes of the central bank, for the Trump administration, that would need to be explored as a working group. And obviously the next administration could change that, and it would most likely be weaponized by the Fed if it wanted to get in an emergency bailout situation whenever it wants to, as it has 20 times since the creation of the creature from Jekyll Island in 1913. It does not necessarily protect self-custody, although there will be executive order working groups to ensure that self-custody is protected. So you need to be engaged in the political process, or pressure needs to be applied in order to make sure that those property rights are protected. It does not engage in not making mining a money service business or operating Lightning custodial networks and making them money service operators, that type of thing. This is all to be figured out in the working group, which is the next stage of the process. It does not provide regulatory clarity. The regulatory lack of clarity exists, but this is why I believe Trump just said, I'm going to profit from it all. Before I become president, I'm going to launch all of my different crypto plays. I'm going to load up on Bitcoin, and then I'm going to announce that America is going to be crypto capital as well. It does not provide for a crypto stockpile, which is the word, strategic reserve stockpiles. I'll go through that in a second. It just means that there is bills by Cynthia Lummis. Cynthia Lummis has a very important role, and there are working groups to explore how these things would work. Essentially, the executive order forms all of these working groups in order to study all of these things, but it does not impose them legally and make them legally binding for the rules to be implemented. But it is a massive step forward. And I expect this Trump administration to be absolutely wild in the mission of making America the crypto capital of the world, while countries like El Salvador make El Salvador the Bitcoin capital of the world. And we see these different types of models emerge that, as always, on Bitcoin Hard Talk, if you subscribe to this channel, I'll make sure that you're up to date through the journey, as I do week on week, and as I have been doing ever since I spoke at the first Bitcoin conference in 2011, 14 years ago, in order to support a bottom-up movement to slowly launch a speculative attack on the proof of weapons network and allow you to own your own money, spend your own money, and have a monetary policy that nobody can ever change as we get further and further into that mission. And no matter what these governments do, no matter what America does, that is still a reality for everybody. Right, my voice, I'm going to have to keep taking water breaks, so do me a favor. If you're enjoying this content, I'm going to continue. We're just in the Bitcoin section, but please do like, please do share. YouTube hates this content, particularly the geopolitical section. So I rely upon you helping the algorithm. Put a little comment in there below. Let me know if you're enjoying the content. And I'm just going to take a quick sip of water so my voice doesn't die, because this is my first one back after my voice dying. Okay, appreciate all the likes, retweets, and your love, because we need more and more people to understand these messages and transition. Right, what happened immediately? Well, Gary Gensler's out, new SEC, new leadership pro-crypto, and immediately there was a rescinding of a congressional decision to go through with something called SAB 121. Which was a way for banks to engage in the crypto industry. So I hope you're getting the point here. In El Salvador, while they're holding Bitcoin in self-custody and publishing their wallet address and buying 1 Bitcoin every day for treasury to slowly fight against the International Monetary Fund, in America, they're making sure that banks engage in crypto. They're launching ETFs so that BlackRock and Fidelity can engage in Bitcoin. They launched Operation Choke Point 2.0 to hand the industry in America over to the banks. And now they're rescinding because Biden basically launched an executive order to reverse for the SEC for Operation Choke Point 2.0 the ability for banks to engage in the crypto industry. Immediately, banks can now engage in the crypto industry. Now, there is a plethora of interesting challenges that happen there. Hopefully, it will be done off balance sheet and it can be custodians so that we can have this two-tiered system where banks that hold, because the magic of fractional reserve banking, banks get to engage in double bookkeeping where every liability to a customer is matched by a fake asset. This is how they create money. If they put those crypto assets and Bitcoin pumps in value, then the smaller banks have to go out and get some more assets, but the larger banks don't have to play by the same rules because they're shareholders of the Federal Reserve. And so this really creates a speculative attack opportunity for the smaller banks to be gobbled up by the big banks as BlackRock accumulates more and more Bitcoin. And then they can use that in order to repurpose those small banks' balance sheets, which will be engaging in crypto in order to protect themselves as we go through this transition phase. And so SAB 121 allows that to happen. Everyone celebrates because they'll be able to go easily from bank deposit to stablecoin. They'll be able to, the smaller banks will engage in crypto services. It reverses some of the effects of Operation Choke Point 2.0, but it still doesn't mean that you hold your Bitcoin with a bank, because that's how you get yourself in the type of environment where you don't boycott the Federal Reserve, you support the Federal Reserve in their two-tiered system. But hopefully it goes off balance sheet and they can charge for custody. They can make it easier, reducing the friction between bank deposit to Bitcoin. But recognize that SAB 121 is legislation to make sure that the banks are heavily involved in Bitcoin and crypto within America, encouraging you to hold it in custody with the banks through the stock market with BlackRock, where they can essentially make sure that you pay tax or put it into your pension via one of their structures, so that they can serve the vested interest of the shareholders of the Federal Reserve. Of course, you can peacefully resist that, but this is just an indication of America looking to service the shareholders of the Federal Reserve and transition them slowly to this crypto capital of America. Look, it's all good. As long as you're holding it in self-custody, you're protected. And as long as the vast majority, so you share this message so that people are gradually making sure that, Bitcoin was designed where it doesn't matter who owns it. It's not a proof of stake network. It doesn't mean you get a voting right in the system, because we resisted the attacks from BlackRock when they did the ESG narrative to try and transition Bitcoin to proof of stake. Fortunately, nobody can control it, despite many people trying, because proof of work is resistant. It requires 95% consensus in order to make a change, and no one will transition from proof of work to proof of stake. So they couldn't beat us, so they joined us, and we got Operation Choke Point 2.0, and now America implementing a bank establishment pro-crypto regulations so they can join the game. There's a lot of liquidity there, but the rest of us will be looking for freedom by owning Bitcoin in self-custody and having Bitcoin that we can spend without permission from the banks. And we will hold it and benefit from any price appreciation because our monetary policy can't be changed by the Federal Reserve or the Bank for International Settlements or the Bank of England or the IMF or the World Bank or by BlackRock or by Fidelity or by JP Morgan or by any of the architects of the creature from Jekyll Island that is perpetuating all of these wars through the deep state, through the money printing, and the creation of intelligence agencies that serve their interests, and the fake democracies that sit underneath them that make you think you need to be distracted from moving to left and right. And hopefully, I remain hopeful. I'm deeply skeptical and don't care, but hopefully all the indications so far is that Trump is doing interesting things to push back against some of those deep state forces, and I'll cover the ones that he's not. And so we'll move through all that. Well, anyway, there was a reversal of SARB 121. So banks in America will be able to get involved in crypto. Okay, right. Now, that is what has happened in week one. Now, because we have not been covering every week, I need to go a little bit back and look at what happened before the 20th of January. So the first thing is that Trump already, during the Biden administration, had launched his NFT collection. And so his non-fungible tokens was something, he's always been a shitcoiner. He's pumped his Bitcoin bags, but he always launched shitcoins in order to get yourself more Bitcoin. That tends to be what crypto is used for in the end, as people go through their educational cycle. People go through the fiat currency money printing. They create something and then they try and slowly transition over to storing their value in Bitcoin. And we get all of this crazy stuff that happens in the crypto market in between. You can decide to use the crypto market to your benefit to accumulate more Bitcoin, or you can decide to just go into Bitcoin, accumulate more Bitcoin, or a little bit of both. That is the friction of the market. And what we've always done is help people make sure that they end up with more Bitcoin every month. And then they're using some of the, alternative strategies in order to generate income to protect themselves from artificial intelligence. Make sure that you are on the simondixon.com membership, on the list, and you've got access to the free Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal so that I can give you more of the guides on how to transition to that world. We've got a lot planned for you this year as well. Anyway, so what did he do? He launched his NFT collection during the Biden administration. He increased his Bitcoin position and transferred it over to Blind Trust. We don't know exactly how big it is, but he's got his Bitcoin position. And then immediately he launched World Liberty Financial. During World Liberty Financial, it's done through his family, through an LLC, a limited liability company, and he launched his governance token, which was a token sale where it won't be able to trade for after a year because of the SEC regulations, but it will require regulatory clarity from the SEC. He's basically saying, if you want to clarify this, I got my token in my family, so you can come up against me. And that creates a crazy dynamic, but he has his governance token. He also launched a DeFi project, which allows people to borrow against their collateral. This really involves self-custody of your digital assets, and this will also have knock-on effects on Bitcoin. So all of this stuff happening in crypto will be good for Bitcoin as well. You just got to get the right strategy. This makes sure that you get property rights and self-custody. He also launches stablecoin, which is essentially a speculative attack on the Federal Reserve banking system and the credit creation system. But that one, the Fed will want to get involved, and the OCC regulators, and that one we have to watch the battle for as well. And so now he's involved in all these battles through a massive conflict of interest. And he launched his World Liberty Financial, and World Liberty Financial, through his family, announced just before the administration that it is purchased using the tokens that it sold through the token sale, 4,563 additional ETH tokens for their positions. And they are now basically holding about $62 million of Ethereum on World Liberty Financial's balance sheet. They also purchased $47 million in what's called wrap Bitcoin, which is where essentially you issue an asset on Ethereum that is backed by Bitcoin held in custody through a service like BitGo. And so it is not Bitcoin, but it gives you the ability to do things in DeFi with your Bitcoin by adding smart contract risk on top of it and custody risk on top of it. And so rather than holding Bitcoin, World Liberty Financial is doing an Ethereum play with Bitcoin. So there is a clear push for Ethereum as well as part of this strategy, as well as BlackRock working with Securitize in order to launch Ethereum tokenized exchange assets. And so there will be a big push and expect the ETFs to switch to staking and execute that plan as well as Ethereum transitions to more of a corporate chain, as we were seeing. So they don't have real Bitcoin in World Liberty Financial. They got initially $47 million of wrap Bitcoin, ETH, and then about 4.7 million of Aave, which is the protocol they forked that allows you to lock up assets on the Ethereum chain, receive yield, and borrow against your assets. And so this is deep into the DeFi degen types of things. And then they also had some other tokens like Link, which goes back to Oracle. Oracle received a bunch of money, like a partnership with ChatGPT for $500 billion, which is money for the deep state in order to use artificial intelligence, in order to surveil people and make sure that the CIA is getting all of the data through partnerships with Oracle. And this is creating the blockchain version of that. And TRX and various other shitcoins as well. ENA was another one. And announced that it is, there was also an announcement right up before the Trump administration went in that they're going to be creating a America First strategic reserve that prioritizes cryptocurrencies, digital assets, including ones that set up and are created by American entrepreneurs. And that included companies like Solana Foundation, or not-for-profits like Solana, and XRP, which taught a model to the Trump administration of how to make a shit ton of money by pre-mining a token, putting a bunch of that token on a corporate balance sheet, and over time selling that token and earning transaction fees over time. So Brad Garlinghouse, who printed, a bunch of XRP tokens, 60% went on to the balance sheet, full disclosure. Years ago, I invested in Ripple Labs at Bank to the Future, the company I co-founded. We've got about 16 different secondary markets in many of the different private equity companies like Circle, Kraken, Coinbase, Bitfinex, many of the largest companies in crypto. One of them was Ripple Labs, but 60% of the XRP tokens went on that balance sheet, and it earns revenue by selling those tokens over time onto XRP holders. And then there's this separate chain, XRP, which is integrated into supporting the Bankster network to transition to central bank digital currencies and all sorts of things. The Ripple lobby, transitioned from supporting Kamala Harris to supporting Trump, and Trump took pictures with Brad Garlinghouse. And I'm sure there was massive amounts of XRP that was printed that was then converted into Bitcoin and then contributed to the Trump administration, forming the crypto lobby in order to make sure that not only is it a Bitcoin strategic reserve, but it is also an XRP strategic reserve. And Trump loved the model. And then Trump launched right before the Trump administration started on the 20th. Days before, he launched two meme coins, one called Trump and one called Melania, which was for his wife, which was launched within 48 hours after launching the first token. But because Solana is more centralized, it can do much, much larger transactions. And so much of the meme coin industry, which does nothing and promises nothing and doesn't have utility, it created this multi-billion-dollar meme coin launch based upon Solana, pumped the hell out of Solana, made an announcement that Solana might be part of the digital currency strategic reserve as regulators transition to an environment of most likely approving Solana ETFs. And you get the point. You see how the Solana lobby, the XRP lobby, and the Crypto America lobby are going to be getting together in order to make America the center of crypto and everybody enriching themselves as part of the process, but also recognizing that everything most likely ends up with Bitcoin in the end, because that's the one that can't be corrupted, with no CEO to assassinate. A fair launch that can wind into existence through proof of work. We have to do the work in order to earn the Bitcoin, or you have to buy it as well without the fiat currency pre-mines. Anyway, these meme coins were launched and Solana pumped like crazy. And the token economics of it were pretty much modeled similar, but worse to XRP. So the token is 100% pre-mined. There is no utility because in order to get regulatory clarity, you can't promise based upon, excuse me, current SEC rules. Do me a favor, hit me a like while I refresh my voice, do a retweet, share this. So current SEC means meme coins can't have utility. They have to just buy it as a collectible to comply with the regulations. 10% was released immediately. 10% was used to provide liquidity into a pool. And 80% are held by a limited liability company, I think called Fight LLC or something along those lines. Sorry if I get the name of the company wrong, but that is transferred into a Trump blind trust. And they have a release schedule. And essentially, if you take the value of the token, multiply it by the value of the 10% that's released. Remember, this was the Mijinsky method and the FTT token method of hiding large holes within a company. I'm not saying they're doing the same. By marking to market the token that can't be sold for that value, but then they can have these multi-billion-dollar assets that are not discounted for liquidity. And they were hiding all of the money that they were obfuscating, which is stealing everyone's Bitcoin. Now, none of that is happening here. I think this has been transparently launched, but we know that this is a supply. 80% is held by the team and is going to be released over the next 3 years over a fixed schedule based upon releasing to certain limited liability companies and a fixed schedule that they disclosed. Immediately, the token went from a few insiders raising, opening new addresses, converting it to Solana, and then getting in very early to the token being worth about $17 billion just on the 10% of the supply. It basically trashed all of the degenerate meme coins and altcoin, where everybody was forced to sell their meme coin because it was sucking up all of the liquidity from all the other degenerate stuff, forcing people to sell their meme coins, buy Trump meme coin, and it just ended up crashing the entire altcoin low liquidity market and sucking it all up into the Trump meme coin. And this created essentially a fully diluted market capitalization at one point of a peak of $74 billion. To put this in context, Trump's net worth is reported to be $6 billion with lots of leverage. The fully diluted market cap, based upon 80% of $74 billion within 48 hours, increased his on paper net worth to significantly larger than his entire net worth. At the same time, as transitioning to the new Trump administration, signing all these executive orders and doing everything that is required in order to be Trump. But it wasn't enough. Immediately before he went in, within 48 hours, he decided we need to launch a coin for my wife as well. And all of a sudden, all of the buyer demand for the Trump token completely collapsed and went into this new toy, this new meme coin for his wife, which crashed the price in half. We ended up with half the market cap. And some people maybe stayed in, others lost. These are degens, you do what you do. And this is essentially gambling. So it's the price you pay for gambling. And suddenly there was about 38,500 sellers for every 13,300 buyers of the Trump token. In 1 hour, there was approximately $352 million of seller volume for every $242 million of buyer volume into the new token. So the ratio of buyers to sellers was just about 1.3x, which basically led to a massive crash in the price. And the selling pressure was so strong that essentially Solana and the cryptocurrency basically itself, it fell by almost 20% within the first few minutes. And then the market cap crashed by about a half within the first few hours as well. And then across all meme coins, it was well over $10 billion, or both the meme coins, as the market cap basically was eradicated, and shows never launch a second meme coin within 48 hours of launching the first meme coin. This was a record anyway, within the first 48 hours of basically 827,000 holders of Donald Trump's meme coin immediately occurred on Solana. So this could have been new people buying it on card, or it could have been people that already have Solana wallet address, but it drove a lot of new people in. Basically this just broke all new records and created a lot of controversy, crashed the market by approximately 55% immediately within the new launch. And immediately what follows is that the SEC there was an announcement that the SEC will set up this new task force by Cynthia Lummis as well, in order to have a comprehensive regulatory framework for crypto assets. And the Trump administration got into place. As soon as the Trump administration got into place, people were speculating whether it's going to be an executive order to push forward a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Cynthia Lummis, who had been pushing forward that bill, she came out and said, I've got a very exciting announcement. Immediately, everybody thought that that was going to be an announcement of an executive order that Bitcoin strategic reserve is going to be announced. But immediately thereafter, there was an announcement that she has been appointed to be the chair of the Senate Banking Subcommittee on Digital Assets, with no Federal Reserve member and no FDIC, which in itself is extremely bullish for the long-term crypto digital assets vision for America. But it immediately led to disappointment because people's expectations were so high. But what is going to be her priority? It is to urgently pass legalizing a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and that may, for political reasons, also have to include a digital asset reserve, depending on how the lobby groups of the altcoins going through its political process, as we know, within the American lobby groups as well. So what about Bitcoin in this whole process? Well, immediately there was an executive order announced by the Trump administration that there will be a strategic stockpile. So rather than reserve, it was stockpile, which means essentially that you can take all of the crypto assets that have been confiscated by people, and the Department of Justice has confiscated a bunch of crypto assets, and they can be held and not sold like the other strategic stockpile assets that America holds. And it can transition to a Bitcoin strategic reserves. And a strategic reserve means that it could be put in the same category as gold, as treasuries, as currency reserves, and also can be used in order to buy Bitcoin into the future once the working group has been through an experiment for what that looks like. So let's remember what America currently has, and this goes full circle into the Ross Ulbricht story, plus the 2016 story of the Bitfinex hack that I've covered, and Bank to the Future was involved in a restructuring to support creditors in order to become shareholders of Bitfinex and be entitled to some of those Bitcoin. This all goes full circle, and I've covered it in many different episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk. If you're new to the show, then I'll give you a quick recap. But there is a strategic stockpile of approximately 220,000 Bitcoins that the US owns. Where did they get them from? Well, the Department of Justice retrieved 100,000 of them from the hacker of the 2016 Bitfinex hack. And during the Biden administration, the Department of Justice approved that 69,000 of the additional Bitcoin on top of the 100,000 was approved to be sold under the Biden administration. And so this essentially could halt that order and say, don't sell them, transfer them over from the Department of Justice over to the Treasury Department that either stockpiles them, but the Department of Justice could say, well, yeah, but only if you give us $3.5 billion to buy those assets. And then the Federal Reserve could decide to do it, or they could take the strategic assets of gold, sell some of them in order to purchase them from the Department of Justice. Then the Department of Justice gets an additional budget to transfer those coins over. And the devil's in the detail at this stage. Or it could be done via executive order and then congressional approval. But, you know, they sit on the Department of Justice balance sheet. Now, the 100,000 Bitcoin has to be returned to Bitfinex. So this puts the strategic reserve down to 120,000. The 69,000 may need to be purchased with dollars or gold reserves in order to diversify the strategic reserves or the stockpile. And so there may be some internal politics around that. But, you know, the US government has said that those 120,000, they were seized with, Bitcoin worth $11.87 billion from Bitfinex, and the rest were from Silk Road. And so now Ross Ulbricht and people have been looking at the wallets, and allegedly there was about $40 million worth of Bitcoin in those original wallets, but the rest of it has gone over to the Department of Justice. So while Ross Ulbricht has been freed from freedom money, and the UK government has freed Julian Assange, that was created a website that held the government to account and was saved by Bitcoin freedom money, we get this internal power struggle between Treasury, Department of Justice, Department of Defense, and whoever wants to use those Bitcoins, whether it becomes a Department of Defense issue, a DOJ issue, or a Treasury strategic reserve issue. That's the detail that will have to be figured out as well. But there is significantly less, and so therefore it moves into the lobby effort to make America and Treasury be able to buy additional Bitcoin in order to be able to restructure as a defense issue, in case the Federal Reserve destroys the dollar based upon getting the US government into this excessive debt through its debt-based proof of weapons Ponzi scheme as well. So to be followed, and we will make sure we cover it. Bitcoin don't care. Bitcoin proof of work will continue anyway. And this gives additional time for an alternative, you to front run the US government and countries to move faster and do it as well. At the same time, states can front run as well. So Texas Senator Charles Schumer introduced a bill to create a strategic reserve, Bitcoin reserve for Texas. There was also a new announcement from the state of New Hampshire that is going to be doing or introducing legislation to do the same too. And at the same time, Tether decided that it is going to be relocating to El Salvador after securing a license within El Salvador. And so the El Salvador gets to look at how they can use the dollarization through digital assets and dollar-backed stable coins, while using that in order to build its Bitcoin strategic reserves and demonstrate to America how America could do it when it figures out that it's borrowing off itself in stable coins and essentially giving Tether a subsidy through its treasury strategy to buy 8,000 Bitcoin, which it has done over the last 6 months, through these dollar-backed stable coins, and El Salvador hosting companies like Tether in order to bring those Bitcoin back into El Salvador so they can fight against the International Monetary Fund, and other countries get to watch and observe this amazing experiment of the amazing ability of never being able to change your money supply because Bitcoin created this proof of work network, being able to fight the largest entrenched interests, and you being able to protect yourself and watch the whole show on the side anyway. So this really aligns with the El Salvador strategy of a dollarized economy with a Bitcoin economy, and hopefully other countries like Syria can learn as well. I'll go through more of that in the geopolitical section because there was a massive change from the proof of weapons network that happened within Syria that we need to cover in the geopolitical section as well. So I anticipate some kind of resistance against this from EU regulators as well. I think the US will be happy with this because they get to spread the dollar, protect itself by allowing a more efficient way of taking treasuries and backing them by digital assets and protecting itself rather than having to borrow them and have this money creation and debt-based Ponzi scheme of the Federal Reserve Proof of Weapons Network. We will keep watching this. The reason I think Euro will fight back against this is they will implement their MiCA regulations, which is already in full force. Tether has said they're pulling out of EU. They're unwinding their EU-backed stablecoin or Euro-backed stablecoin, proving that it's really easy to unwind stablecoins. And the FUD of that would destroy Bitcoin is complete lies and ridiculousness because nobody's following the money. All it means is that you sell your treasuries in order to give people redemptions for dollars or euros. And most people in crypto will say, I can't be bothered to redeem them and try and get my bank to sign off on receiving that money. So I'll just convert it into Bitcoin. So the unwind of a stable coin like a euro, a euro stable coin or a dollar stable coin just means that it unwinds treasuries, lead to selling pressure. And it means that most people either have a bank friendly to that, or they end up converting it into Bitcoin and creates buy-in pressure. And that would be on the FUD of people that are confused, that don't follow the money, not understanding it, which would make an initial crash in the Bitcoin price and create a beautiful buying opportunity on such an event as well. So all to say, El Salvador remains the Bitcoin capital of the world. America is pushing to be the crypto capital of the world. The BRICS layer can use their distributed ledger to try and marry the old legacy fiat currencies and gold, and will likely end up with Bitcoin and realize that Bitcoin solves the problems as we move to this multipolar world. And everybody gets to exit the system and say, well, I'll launch my Bitcoin-backed bonds rather than having to borrow from China in the Belt and Road Initiative. They give me, great investment in infrastructure and don't change your regime, which is an improvement on the IMF, which will overthrow your government through the deep state to force you to borrow dollars and make you print your own currency, which destroys wealth from the local people. And then governments and central banks end up lending it back to the US government that perpetuates the demand for the dollar and creates this inflationary spiral and loop. And so America can be the crypto capital as we transition away from that proof of weapons network. And we basically, El Salvador can continue to challenge the International Monetary Fund through Bitcoin, while America can continue to work with the International Monetary Fund through pro-crypto regulations and a bank-friendly environment and an ETF-friendly environment. As crypto is used in order to transition slowly to the CBDC world, despite the fact that it may be executive orders to make sure it doesn't get there. Eventually, these two missions collide as we move into a multipolar currency war, and we'll keep covering it as it happens and making sure you are ahead. But still, the mission is the same. You need to prepare for a world dominated by Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. So watch your space. We also got a couple more announcements immediately that were oppressed in the Biden administration that are now getting ready to create new financial services based upon this. Coinbase, a company that at Bank to the Future and myself, we were a seed investor into private equity many years ago. They went public on NASDAQ, but they decided that they're going to return and back launching Bitcoin-backed loans. And so this is a collateralized system, which is different to the usurious fiat currency proof of weapons network, where essentially banks get to create debt and dollars every time they issue a loan. And therefore, you have these fractional reserves that require a bailout from the Federal Reserve, which then requires a bailout from issuing new debt through quantitative easing. And the Fed has these new tools, which eventually will be a central bank digital currency. Instead, people get to lock up their collateral, generate wealth, and borrow against it through collateralized lending through this two-tiered system. And Coinbase has decided to return to launching their Bitcoin-backed loans. I'm not saying whether this is a good thing or a bad thing that you should do. You need to risk manage if you're engaging in this. But people do make mental calculations about how to use the features of the dollar, which is designed to go down in value, to lever up loans on their Bitcoin, which is designed over the long term to go up in value, to ensure that they don't create tactical events and have to sell their Bitcoin and play the fiat currency proof of weapons network against the beauty of the Bitcoin's proof of work network. And so now you can borrow USDC against your Bitcoin, which is built upon Base, which is built upon Ethereum. And it just plays into this fact that now people can generate income in order to get into Bitcoin, or they can borrow against their Bitcoin. But that needs to be really managed and understood as we transition to the securitization and financialization of these different systems that inevitably is going to happen as America transitions to the crypto capital of the world and other countries decide if they want to front run that mission as well. We also had the rolling out of basically it's excluding New York. And so you'd expect New York to adjust in this new Trump administration. You expect more and more collateral-based assets and more regions to open up as it initially beta tests this on the US based upon state adoption as they wait for some of these executive orders to come through. As we've already said, Gary Gensler is gone. And so that is emboldening people to do this more experimental things and work with the regulators, as Coinbase has always tried to do. As we move to now he's officially resigned. We also saw that there was the SEC has still officially decided to file an appeal against Ripple for the XRP case and that lawsuit. And immediately Ripple's law firm at Ripple Labs, the company, the chief legal officer came up and said, the SEC's lawsuit is likely to be abandoned under the new administration. And we know that Brad Garlinghouse has a relationship with Trump, and the XRP lobby is in full force in order to build the XRP army as well. And so I expect that to be, that to disappear as the crypto industry will benefit from that. And then the Bitcoin industry in turn will benefit from that. And we end up in this crypto Bitcoin multipolar dollar proof of weapons, multipolar BRICS Bitcoin worlds that we're going to be transitioning in the currency wars moving forward. So now we know why XRP pumped 500% during the Biden administration, leading into the Trump administration. And there was a very careful, orchestrated XRP lobby campaign in order to do that. Meanwhile, the Texas Bitcoin miners like Marathon Digital, Mara, who's listed on NASDAQ and is part of energy efficiency, repurposing the grid, using Bitcoin for all of its power and potential, as the Trump administration moves to this drill, baby, drill, energy environment of repurposing, fracking, and using electricity in order to power all of this Bitcoin mining and artificial intelligence. They decided to honor Trump and do some brilliant bootlicking for the Trump administration. And they took the portrait of Trump looking as a hard, badass dude and mined it into the Bitcoin blockchain. And so there is a Trump portrait mined into the Bitcoin blockchain around the change of the administration, thanks to Marathon Digital operating its nodes and mining that block into existence. Then it would exist there forever as a symbolism of also Bitcoin becoming a part of the strategic strategy of America, being the center of crypto as well. Immediately after the launch of the meme coins, we saw the craziness of Pastor Lorenzo saying that now the institutions of the church are going to be involved in launching meme coins in order to support those institutions. And so immediately Pastor Lorenzo pre-mined a token and said that it is going to be contributed, all those pre-mined coins, to the liquidity pool so that they will never be able to sell it, but they'll be able to fund their institution based upon the fees that are generated in that liquidity pool as this meme coin crazy world flourishes. And we get this crazy world that is just a part of welcome to the new vision of crypto being used, involved in these currency wars, with all of the craziness that comes from it, and a free market that evolves. And we need to call out scams, we need to call out craziness, and we need to recognize how to transition into that world. We also saw that Rumble, after taking its investment from Tether, which is an alternative to YouTube, we tend to upload our videos onto Rumble afterwards. If you're on Rumble, make sure you follow me, because YouTube hates this half of this content, but maybe it's going to change, as now we've got the technocrats saying that they're going to be moving to free speech, so that the AI can take all of our, they'll allow us to talk, but they won't give us freedom of reach, because YouTube isn't giving us freedom of speech. Seems to be giving us a bit more freedom of speech, even though I'm saying things against the technocratic agenda. But now Rumble is going to also, it made its first purchase of Bitcoin after receiving an investment from Tether. And maybe the YouTube rival, it made an announcement that Rumble is also going to be launching a digital wallet that is integrated with Bitcoin and Tether. And it is going to be relocating to El Salvador in order to allow this digital dollarized world and Bitcoin world exist, as El Salvador is using the Federal Reserve and Bitcoin in order to launch an attack against the powers of the International Monetary Fund. So Rumble, welcome on board. We'll keep watching how that actually works out. And also MicroStrategy, they are up to now 461,000 Bitcoin. So get ready for this new world and the reaction from all the different countries that are now going to decide to front run or wait. And that is the world that we knew would happen as one of the strategic reasons to bring and vote for Trump. And now we're going to be moving over to the second section. Sorry if there was so much to cover and catch up on. There was actually so much more as well, but I think you get the point, and this brings us back into it. Right, do me a favor. We're going to now move into the macro section, what the executive orders from Trump mean to the global macroeconomic environment. Finally, we're going to be doing the geopolitical section. This one's going to be an extended version of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 67. Hope you're enjoying it. We'll do a timestamp now for those people that want to skip to the macro section. But do me a favor, like, share, add some comments, support me, retweet, follow on Rumble. Make sure that we get as much support as possible in making sure that as many people are ready for a Bitcoin AI and CBDC world. And they're watching Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 67. I'm going to protect my voice, and then we're going to move over to the macro section and the impact of these executive orders. Brilliant. Okay, well, that took us a whole hour just to get through the Bitcoin section. I'll try and get through it. I got so much I want to cover, and maybe we'll skip and leave some more for next week. But I think the most significant events were following Trump. You know, he went over to the World Economic Forum. He said that he wants to get rates down. And so his strategic mission is to take on the Federal Reserve and do whatever is required in order to get rates down, which means welcome to the return to inflation. If you remember when we were covering the decrease in rates, that the Federal Reserve was decreasing rates at the same time as inflation not meeting its 2% target. So it came down to 2.4%, and then they pushed it down by half a percentage point while inflation was up to 2.6%. And in December, they did another quarter of a point while inflation returned to 2.9%, because 3% is the new normal, and they just don't care about the 2% target. And inflation has just become a strategic feature. Well, Trump wants it to go down further and to apply as much pressure on the Fed in order to get it down further, which means higher inflation. So lower rates, higher inflation, increase in the national debt. He also launched what he called rather than calling the Green New Deal, which is the transition to renewable energies from oil and fossil fuels, he called it a Green New Scam. And so America is just going to be forgetting about it, pulling out of the Paris Treaty agreements, and moving away and focus on America first. Drill, baby, drill is the strategy. So this means that his strategic goal is to move away, transition over to nuclear energy, which is, the right thing to do, because that is very energy efficient, at the same time as being an awesome form of electricity to power all of the artificial intelligence and the proof of work that's needed as we transition to this world of AI and Bitcoin and central bank digital currencies, powering some of the proof of stake networks as the traditional TradFi institutions look to take over those proof of stake networks. But essentially, that is very clear that he wants to get down oil prices. Now, this also serves a geopolitical strategic. If you can get down gas prices and oil prices, then he wants to have a tool for ending the war between Russia and the American proxy NATO and the deep state that pulled back on all the agreements of when the CIA executed coups to overthrow some of the strategic elements of the Ukrainian government and expanded NATO and moved away from the peace agreements that led to the end of the Cold War and essentially turned Ukraine by implanting its own CIA-backed plant to make sure that the profits from the military-industrial complex were used from the money printing of the Federal Reserve by laundering money through Ukraine to make sure it gets back to the military-industrial complex, and then support BlackRock in their goal of acquiring all of the land from Ukraine, which now essentially used the Bank of England and the UK government to underwrite the IMF debt in order to make sure that Ukraine becomes a playground for the deep state, and put Zelensky there in order to scam the world into spending more and more money on NATO, which increases the profits of the US dollar proof of weapons network, while BlackRock gets to collateralize these assets, and we get a cost of living crisis across Europe by the CIA blowing up Nord Stream pipeline to destroy the European economies and make sure that the natural gas is bought and purchased from America to take down the European economies in order to prop up the dollar through the euro dollar and the petrodollar through through Israel as a proxy for ensuring that there's no peace in the Middle East, and using the monarchs that are controlled in puppet states like Egypt, which is there in order to ensure. I've gone into the geopolitical section. Let's not go there. We'll go there anyway. Well, anyway, in order to get some leverage to end the war between Russia and NATO via the proxy Ukraine, crash the price of oil, and then that has less funding for Russia, less funding for Iran, but it also means it has a side benefit for China. So that brings us into a trade war where America or Trump says, all right, we're going to get the price of oil down. We'll allow you to purchase more oil from Russia as long as Russia holds back, and then we want to do those tariffs. So these are the games that are going to be played in the negotiations. These are smart games, but we need to follow the money and recognize what those games are. And so I expect this to be a force for bringing down the price of oil. And so the speeches essentially have been all around orders from Trump to move towards this type of strategy. There was a call out for a national emergency during his initial speeches on the southern borders. So immigration is a key part of the strategy. So we have the decrease in the price of oil. We have a movement towards artificial intelligence, which takes away many of the jobs based upon lower gas, and a movement towards nuclear in order to power the energy of artificial intelligence, where those $500 billion contracts through the executive's orders are going to Oracle and CIA and deep state, while the deep state is pushing forward more and more war. And then Trump has a great narrative, which is, I want to be the peace guy. And so this creates a lot of friction and a lot of interesting things. And one of the strategic, strategies is to protect the border. And that in itself is inflationary, because you are replacing illegal immigration, which is deflationary, with legal immigration, which you absolutely should do in order for a national security goal. But at the same time, Trump is saying he's going to combat inflation. So he's asking the Federal Reserve to push down rates, which is inflationary. He's asking to replace illegal immigration with legal immigration, which is inflationary. And then at the same time, tariffs, which if done wrong, are going to be used as a negotiating tool for the geopolitical strategic goals, which is inflationary. The only force that is disinflationary is lowering gas prices, which is pushing more electricity into artificial intelligence, which replaces jobs with a movement towards a strategic goal for both robotics and AI-powered intelligence. Get ready. The Trump administration is using all of these forces, but I do not understand the maths on how you're going to combat inflation. Which brings me to everybody needs to protect themselves from inflation. And the only way to protect yourself from inflation is to understand that you cannot use debt in order to consume. You have to be acquiring assets that are going to benefit from the proof of weapons network, which is real estate and stocks and bonds, at the same time as acquiring the boycott of the proof of weapons network, which is Bitcoin. And you can utilize the proof of weapons network in order to get some yield, buy more Bitcoin as we transition to this world. That's exactly what I'll be guiding people, as I always have on things like the Bitcoin Wealth Builder program. So make sure you are on simondixon.com. I'm going to be releasing a free video series where every year after the 4-year cycle, I review my portfolio, share my portfolio, and do a live investment. And I'll share with you exactly how I do it, so you can decide how to do it as well. But anyway, there's going to be a halt on many of these illegal immigrations. The border's going to be closed, and there is going to be a massive battle between the court legality, mass deportations, and already there's executive orders in order to use the military to secure the border, which I think the vast majority of Americans are happy with. Even illegal immigrants that are there, or even the legal immigrants, want to transition to legal immigration. But these are all psyops in order to make the obfuscation of inflation and employment figures be used. And so there's going to be an end to that, is the goal of the Trump administration. But the court and judicial and Congress will have to go through their internal conflict and battles around many of the agendas and NGOs that have lobbying power against these things as well. One thing I was very interested about in one of the executive orders is that rather than placing the whole, Israel kind of deep state narrative that the fake war on terror is just a Muslim things in order to drive you into regime change through the clean break strategy that has led to all of the wars, that has led to the destabilization of the Middle East, to construct the petrodollar in order to prop up the dollar and create the demand for the dollar. There was a pushback against that. So the narrative of only Muslims are terrorists, which is the narrative that was needed, as hopefully we get these release of 9/11 files and people can understand the psyops that the CIA and Mossad were involved in all those things. Trump wants to classify the drug cartels in Mexico, and we know what happens there. Remember, these drug cartels were set up from the Opium Wars, which was MI6 and the British Empire that was trying to get China addicted to drug to steal its silver, using opium and poppy seeds to steal gold from America in the mercantile economy times. And then that was used in order to push the Opium Wars. And then legal drugs were exported from China to America. And then America would set up the illegal drug cartels. The CIA were those drug cartels. And so all of the human trafficking operations and drug cartels were, in fact, the CIA that set up things like the Banana Republic, and to protect these MI6 and CIA operations. And Mossad was set up in order to have a jurisdiction to destabilize oil being used and weaponized against it. And this is what intelligence agencies were set up for. We know that those drugs that get into America are still done through these networks, but classifying them as terrorist organizations is a movement towards taking on the deep state and pushing back against that fake war on terror narrative that is being pushed at the moment by many of the controlled media to scare you into thinking that this is all the justification for regime change in Iran and some of those trends. And so Trump said that he's going to be classifying these cartels as terrorists, which I encourage. I think that's a great thing. Maybe that's a pushback. And maybe we get executive orders to release some of the psyops that will help Americans actually understand the truth rather than being scammed into thinking that the protection of corporate interest is actually some of the things that they think it is, rather than the things that we've just uncovered and we know now what the deep state is all about. So he's going to be using something called the 1798 Alien Act to be used for foreign gangs in the USA. And he declared a national state of emergency on energy as well, to push forward some of those things. Many of these executives for, and this is all about the drill baby drill narrative to push down the price of oil and gas, which has some of the strategic goals of negotiations as well. There was some talk about the refilling. We've covered those as well. Cutting oil prices. The goal is to cut them by 50%. So oil being 80% per barrel right now, cut that to $40 per barrel, and some of the natural gas as well. There was a reversal of the electric car mandate. And that was some of the Biden administration to with the electric vehicles as well. There were more and more talk around tariffs. There was an executive order to establish a Department of Government Efficiency. There is an executive order to have no US government censorship, whatever that means. Look forward to seeing these things. What else did we have? There was an executive order to reinstate the military from some of the COVID with back pays and all the things that happened. There was a presidential pardon by the Biden administration on Fauci, pushback against that. Many of these things we'll cover. I don't want to go too deeply, but these will all have macro impacts as well. There was a desire to take back the Panama Canal and recall the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf of America, bring back some of those CIA operations like Operation Gladio, look it up, and reignite some of those operations with Central America and Southern America as well. So we need to make sure that we look back at those. A desire, an executive order, an objective for America to go to Mars. Trump threatened specific 10% tariffs on China. This is on top of the 25% tariffs from his previous administration that led to the tariff war and the trade war that I think China won last time. But as I said, all of this leads to inflation. Currently at CPI 2.9%, expect that to push above the 3%. And what justification will the Fed have for pushing down rates other than creating an environment to have this Trump administration internal battle between the Federal Reserve and Treasury? So why is the Fed cutting? And let's see what the next one. So 3% becomes the new 2%, and we shall see what comes from there. There was an announcement from the Fed's Christopher Waller saying that 3 or 4 cuts could be possible in 2025. So there was an announcement of additional cuts, and basically all roads lead to inflation. So everyone needs to protect themselves. That's the Fed's policy, Treasury's policy, and inflation through all these different mechanisms that we already covered going to be. But I don't know and I don't understand how you can have a policy of decreasing inflation. So I see that as a failed promise on top of all the great things that come from these good promises as well. An executive order to focus on energy and AI. Biden did some last minute sanctions on the oil Russia. That led to the spike in the price of oil from about 70% to 80% before the Trump administration came on. And Trump just immediately wants to flood the market with oil and get those prices down, and make sure that America can provide enough cash to push for the artificial intelligence. There was announcements of expanding America to Greenland, which is all about the strategic resources that Greenland holds in order to push for some of the lithium and commodities involved in battery production. And so this is about creating an environment where the assets within Greenland can be used against China, because China has many of these strategic commodities as they push forward with their AI races, their electric vehicle races, their robotics and side as well. It also said that it wants to make Canada part of America. This is almost like a national socialist increase and expansion of the dollar based upon the Fed printing more money, a ban of CBDCs and a return to stable coins, which could be used to print more money to push forward a nationalist agenda. which is what led to essentially the rise of Hitler in the World War II era, a National Socialist agenda, which led to the expansion. And so Canada can be used in order to increase those resources. A failing economy, tariffs can be used to weaponize that in order to make an expansion vision, or this could just be rhetoric in order to involve in more negotiations in America First policy. Mexico as well, rather than having to protect those borders, this whole rhetoric around reunification, as it were, or expansion of Mexico, and also the Gulf of Panama. This is all around making sure that it can negotiate strategic things, but at the same time, an expansive national socialist agenda in order to increase the size of America, or use it in order to negotiate tariffs, which really pushes on those relationships. So expect additional hostilities as America pushes back on its allies as it becomes more nationalistic with an America First policy as well. More and more threatening of tariffs is how you get these things. And in the global environment, this pushes more and more to what we've covered in the past, like the dollar milkshake theory, which is that because the dollar is the world reserve currency, more and more central banks have to hedge against the excessive money printing of their own currency. And you get more and more money printing, which creates America having the least inflationary environment, but everything else being built on top of that through IMF loans, US dollar debt, the military industrial complex, the petrodollar, the euro dollar, an increase in the expansion of NATO, which is in direct conflict with the goals of supporting the US dollar, and this conflict that happens based upon Trump's agenda to be remembered for peace, versus the fact that the dollar is propped up through this system when the post-Bretton Woods World War II system was constructed, where all these currencies drive more demand for dollars, and then central banks, so the members of the Bank for International Settlements, end up with a Fed-first policy and printing more currency and more treasuries being purchased, where that drives more investment into America that they can then be used to drive a deep state agenda for the CIA. And, countries like Pakistan that have their government overthrown through these fake umbrella, movements that are used in order to overthrow and detopple governments, as we saw in 2024 in Venezuela, and which didn't succeed, but the successful ones like Bangladesh and Pakistan as well, and the one that was executed in Syria as well. But anyway, Europe is having a lot of test of this euro dollar market. Germany switched off all of its nuclear power. The European Central Bank took over its currency. The ECB is doing a Fed first policy. More of the euro dollars are propping up the demand for America. This is leading to America succeeding while Europe crumbles. We're seeing the UK being a conduit for the military industrial complex, the banking lobby, and big pharma. And a pushback against that from the people, because it is creating a debt crisis within countries like UK, Germany, Italy, that has little they can do because the European Central Bank, with the exception of the Bank of England, is doing a Fed first policy, pushing towards a European Central Bank digital currency as America pushes back against the Fed, as we have these currency wars and agendas being fulfilled, as we have beta tests, and then that can lead to false flag operations that take down the US banking system and leads to a sudden pivot to a US central bank digital currency. So we will watch all of this as well. Anyway, UK is into record debt. There is a weaker pound, but as we get these alternative policies around tariffs, there was a bit of a strengthening of the pound, but these are temporary measures. We don't look at the temporary. But in general, it is a weakening of the pound with higher debt, with a pension system that is over-leveraged. And remember when Liz Truss tried to fight back against the proof of weapons network, her administration or her prime minister position only lasted like 50 days because the gilt market crashed and led to rates destroying the leverage, and the Bank of England saying we have to do emergency bailout. The same thing that happened during the takedown of Silicon Valley Bank. But the UK has the highest leverage against this pension, as it needs to default against that. So pensioners, through this booming and demographics, are using immigration in order to solve their demographic crisis, which is leading to friction and a nationalist movement within the internal country. And all of that friction as those people retire and their pension can't pay up, which can destroy some of the leverage that exists in the proof of weapons network, which is causing a desire and a need for Bitcoin strategic reserves from countries that need to fight back against these cycles. So Europe is buying record levels of Russian gas, which was announced as a result of these tariff threats. So there are consequences to, the proof of weapons network and the dominance of the US dollar. Europe has to protect itself. And so instead it's saying, well, we need to do more trade with Russia to get this cheaper gas. At the same time as America either successfully pushing back and getting those prices down. And so we have, if you look at the stats, that Europe has had to pivot on its sanctions. And therefore, it's benefiting from the military industrial complex through NATO expenditure, but it's needing the problems with the Nord Stream pipeline blow up and that CIA operation. And so it needs it needs to work more with China and Russia. So China needs the cheap oil and gas from Iran and Russia. And so this creates the friction of these, essentially more and more centralization, and hopefully everything moving to decentralization with Bitcoin strategic reserves as well. So all of this will be happening throughout 2025 and just demonstrating US sanctions may service US interest, but the US dollar proof of weapons has a side effect on Europe. And eventually the ECB, doing a Fed first policy, has a resistance movement from Italy wanting to have its own Bitcoin strategic reserves, and UK wanting to have its own Bitcoin strategic reserves, and Germany wanting to have its UK strategic reserves, and moving to more like, resistance like AFD, which suddenly Elon Musk tries to push that agenda as well, which is the types of friction that we see as we move more and more towards nationalism and these covert operations which are causing problems. That is driving Europe closer to the Kremlin, while the US tries to drive it further and further away so that BlackRock can make sure it gets a return on investment, and the IMF can get its return on investment from the Ukrainian war at the expense of more and more Ukrainian lives as well. So we did see a beautiful thing, which I'm really happy about. There was an executive order in order to declassify the JFK documents, the RFK documents, and the MLK Jr. documents as well. Get those files out. Will we see what we know? We already know it was Lyndon B. Johnson, Mossad, and the CIA in collaboration with Texas oil interests in order to take out the Israeli first policies of holding Israel accountable to its illegal nukes, the JFK movement against the Federal Reserve by launching a $4 trillion issuance of the dollar, backs and convertible into silver, that was in direct conflict with what happened in 71 with the removal of the Nixon shock, and LBJ came into power after RFK, and then you had Nixon, and Nixon took it off the gold standard for the military industrial complex so that you could fund more and more wars through the Cold War, and they were busy fighting the Vietnamese War and the Korean War that led to the splits that we are experiencing right now, where Vietnam is joining BRICS, North Korea is looking to work with Russia and joining BRICS, as South Korea is suddenly implementing a martial law that is leading to the overthrow of the South Korean prime minister and an inquiry as well into what the hell is going in there. So much to cover. But we are seeing literally this global South, global North thing, which looks very, very similar to what we saw during World War I and the lead up to World War II, as the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve push forward those military industrial complex agendas. So we know that that's going to be released. I really hope that that calls into question, that people can see, no, this was nothing to do with, anti-Semitism or anything, that actually Israel was a deep state operation set up by MI5, MI6, the Bank for International Settlements, the Federal Reserve, the Rothschild interests, and hopefully we get the truth as well. And I'll be covering it if it comes out and saying, well, don't say I didn't warn you about it. Anyway, finally, I hope those things will be exposed. Hopefully there'll be more to get the 9/11 files, which was also a clean break thing as well, in a Mossad operation. Also the Epstein files, which is about bribing politicians. And hopefully we can get the Trump assassination files as well. So we don't fall for the false flag operation that is being perpetuated by intelligence agencies through the media that they control through Operation Mockingbird, which is used as media in order to perpetuate and scam people into believing the pro-military industrial complex thing. So I really hope that Americans and the rest of the world get to not fall for these agendas and everything that we've covered as well. We know that JFK tried to support ensuring that the APEC and the Israeli lobby could not bribe politicians. We know that Texas Oil was involved in that. We know that it was silver-backed, and everything we've covered in previous episodes, which brings us nicely into the third section. And I'm going to try and cover it. How much have we got time here? But I'm going to go into the third section anyway. Look, forgive me. I've been off for over a month. We're going to be covering the geopolitical impact and the wars and everything that has happened as a result of these executive orders as well. So if you are still enjoying this, for the timestamp, this will be the third section, the geopolitical section. I'm going to refresh my voice, and I've still got a bunch of content, but I'll try and get through it without this flood wave. Remember to always tune in to future episodes. We recap things, and I'm going to be doing, and I've been building my video series that I do every year, not every year, every 4 years after halving, to make sure that you know how to practically how I invest in all this stuff, at the same time as keeping you up to date every week so that you can prepare for a world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. But I'll be releasing that, and all you need to do is get your free login to the Bitcoin Hard Talk free membership portal by heading over to simondixon.com and making sure you're on the mailing list so I can keep you up to date and get you a copy of my free book if you want to read that. And previous video series that I released, like the Great Depression of the 2020s, and all the emergency broadcasts and previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk. So do me a favor, like, share, retweet, repost, add a comment. I'm going to refresh my voice, and we'll jump into this week in geopolitics as a result of the Trump executive orders. Okay, all right, well, let's jump straight in. So Trump mentioned, which is very encouraging. I really enjoyed this. Some of Trump's speeches, he's been saying some brilliant stuff. And I really want to give credit when there is credit to be given. And so much better than genocidal in the Biden administration, working on his Israel first policy for the military industrial complex and the deep state. But Trump gave lots of talk around nuclearization, which is very, very encouraging. I would like to hear more and more about that. And he talked about how in his previous administration, there were conversations between Russia and America around So the two major nuclear powers, where Russia has higher military capabilities, as well as what it demonstrated in Ukraine when it wanted to show its new types of weaponries. it demonstrated that it is currently a superior nuclear force than America, and America is a major, major nuclear force. So this Cold War and reversal of the Cold War is a complete problem in the fake ideologically communist versus capitalist thing. I'll cover way more about that in future. I don't want to get too distracted, and I've covered it in previous videos as well, the profits and the debt that was created to service the military industrial complex and the proof of weapons network. But this conversation, he proved what is true. And the media tries to make it out that Trump and Putin having a good relationship is a bad thing. No, that is how we engage in diplomacy. That is a good thing. China and America trading again is an awesome thing. Everyone protects their own agendas, of course, but this is what we want. This is not what the Biden administration did, where he wouldn't meet with the most important military nuclear powers in order to discuss denuclearization. And so I really welcome Trump having these conversations, and this is a good thing. And the media deified him for that as well when they were trying to, push an alternative agenda. And so, in his last term, he said that Russia and America were working on that goal. And there was a reversal of that in the Biden administration. And he said that China would have come along because it benefits all. And I believe him. I think that is something that is a productive way of speaking. Now you work on your own stuff, but diplomacy is the key here. We can all succeed together. This is the thing. We don't need to believe the narratives of the fake boogie monster enemy in order to kill more people to support profits. And so Trump said that we can basically, he used some strongman, which is okay. But he put out a tweet on Truth Social, which is ultimately amazing that this is the world that we're doing. Diplomacy happens through social media now. But Trump put out a message and said that we can either do this the easy way or the hard way. There's some strongmanning. He's got to do his strongmanning. We know that Russia has all the power in this negotiation. Because unfortunately, NATO has an alternative agenda. It's supporting BlackRock, the IMF, killing Ukrainian people, and reversing all the peace agreements. And now that is leading to the destruction of Ukrainian land, the complete asset stripping, and the killing of Ukrainian people. All in order to perpetuate this demification as a result of an expanding NATO agenda. And so there was, he gave the right narrative, which is the narrative that Russia and America were allies during World War I and World War II. And there was a toppling, he didn't cover this, but there was a toppling by the Bolsheviks, which was the Rothschild-funded network that created the Federal Reserve in 1913, and also overthrew the Russian Tsar and replaced it with the Soviet Union, which was Marxist communism. That World War II was about fighting against communism, which is that the National Socialist Germany was worried that the Rothschilds were going to do what he did in Russia, which is overthrowing, through Zionism and implementing Marxism. He was scared that was going to happen in Germany. And so he had extreme measures in order to implement monetary reform and fight communism, which was through National Socialism. But anyway, we know that Russia was a major victim in the fight against communism because the Soviet Union was created as an attack against Russia by implementing communism to steal all the gold that ended up in Fort Knox, stealing Russian gold, stealing German gold, stealing English gold, and a transfer of wealth over to Fort Knox by bankrupting the UK government through the agenda of the Bank of England, the Bank for International Settlements, and the Treaty of Versailles. Anyway, I've gone into that. But I like the fact that Trump did some truthful rhetoric, which is there was much, much bigger deaths during World War II. And that was during World War I and World War II and the Bolshevik Revolution, which was an unnatural creation by the military industrial complex and the deep state of the Bolshevik Revolution. for a Zionist-funded agenda that created the foundation of the Fed as well through agents like J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller, for the Rothschild families and the Warburg families. Anyway, Russia lost 60 million people in World War II, and US and Russia were allies. And so they were better off working together, which is a completely true understanding of history. He did state some crazy things like there's currently 350 million or billion or something of trade between Russia and the US, which I don't think exists. I think there's no trade between Russia and the US. Russia figured out its alternative corridors as a result of becoming the most sanctioned in the world. But he is threatening direct tariffs, which will have no impact on Russia whatsoever because those impacts have already happened. The Biden administration tried to flood the world with oil, and because the Biden administration didn't engage directly in war as Saudi Arabia wanted it when the Houthis started to hit the oil, the Biden administration, the Saudis decided to work with the Russians instead and increase the price of oil. That led to the inflation in the US, that led to the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, and led to the speculative attack by the Federal Reserve, Bill Ackman and Peter Thiel, in order to implement a takeover and Operation Choke Point 2.0 with Gary Gensler from the SEC. Covered that in previous broadcasts anyway. But anyway, he's threatening direct tariffs, which I don't think will have any impact on the Russian economy. And so because Russia's already the most sanctioned already, and they figured out that it needs to trade with China, and China benefits with that. It needs to trade with Middle Eastern corridors, which is why previous to the Turkey and US takeover of Syria, Russia was protecting those interests in the Middle East, which was Syria. And it was working with India in order to get the arbitrage, where India is growing faster and faster because it's buying Russian oil and then sending it across to Europe anyway. And so Europe is now expanding its routes with Russia. And so none of it worked. But obviously Trump is strong-arming, saying that millions of Russians are dying, which I just think is inaccurate. We'll never know. And that the economy has been destroyed. But it's a $2.2 trillion economy on $220 billion of debt to GDP. So it's only 22% debt to GDP, which is a remarkable feat. And that led to de-dollarization and the rise of the global South movement to hedge himself against sanctions and the weaponization of the dollar, which led to a movement towards allies buying dollars, which is hurting people's economies. Well, anyway, he continues to threaten, but the rhetoric was we can do it the hard way or the easy way, which means that while you're sanctioned already, we can implement tax problem we need to watch as well. It also creates major economic problems for both the US and its allies, like Germany, which is being completely destroyed and then driving it closer to Russia and China, as it has no choice as well. And the problem with this rhetoric is that Russia has the power in this negotiation. It may say, okay, what is the hard way? We want to negotiate, and which I think is very healthy for Putin and Trump to have these talks and do phone calls and do what the Biden administration never did. And that has led to Ukrainian deaths. It's led to Russian deaths, as it has across the Middle East, and the genocide Joe supporting the genocide in Gaza as well. The US can't send any troops because US military does not want to fight for this. And so, it can't send troops. It can only support the profits of the military industrial complex, which is what the deep state is trying to do as well. And so all it can do is send more weapons, which actually is an agenda, but it harms Americans because the Fed prints more dollars through a low interest rate environment. Those dollars make its way to the increase in NATO expenditure, to the increase in military expenditure. That supports the profits of military companies, which creates more wealth inequality, which creates more inflation, supports the stock market increasing, which helps Trump say GDP up, but it doesn't help the average American. And the average American, which is what Trump, got his vote from, because people are fed up of it. Now, we will forgive him for saying that he will solve the Russia-Ukraine issue within 24 hours. This is so complicated, not possible. And yeah, he got some votes on that, but he did do some great stuff in that. So I'll forgive him for that. We always warned on Bitcoin Hard Talk, not possible. So the goalpost has been moved and said rather than 24 hours, it's been pivoted to a 100-day narrative through the Trump administration guy, Kellogg, who's in charge of diplomacy. And he's really strong-arming that Ukraine is in more of a powerful position than it is. And, that's what you expect it to do. But they said it's going to be over within 100 days. And it's very, very healthy that Trump has a call with Putin this week, because Putin wants to end this as well. But the big question, as it has always been, is beyond the Trump administration, how can Russia ensure that the military-industrial complex and the deep state doesn't expand NATO in order for the profits of the US dollar and the petrodollar and the euro dollar try and increase and push war with Russia, which is testing this military power that we all lose from as the deep state decides that it wants to push us forward. So that is the challenge. And I don't know how you solve that, but we will keep covering it in Bitcoin Hard Talk as well. Ukraine is the victim in the middle. Zelensky is corrupt. He confirmed on the Lex Friedman podcast that only half the money's getting there. He's claiming that the military-industrial complex is taking all the bribes in the US. We know that Ukrainian bribes and politicians are happening there, and Ukrainian lives are being taken as a result of this mass corruption. It's disgusting. It's horrible to watch. Ukraine, it doesn't have a weapons problem. It has a manpower problem because people are dying. And Russia can always expand it. And Biden just never engaged in diplomacy and used deep state agents like, I can't even remember the name of our politician. He's so irrelevant. Boris Johnson. Let's forget. I gave Boris Johnson the Bitcoin strategy to make Bitcoin legal tender in the UK in 2013. He laughed me out of the room. But Boris Johnson tried to get in the way of all peace, and he's just propping up the deep state, the IMF, and the Bank of England without the interest of the UK people, causing a war-first policy rather than supporting a UK-first policy as well. Anyway, Biden never talked to Putin, and that's why we are where we are. The big problem is that this negotiation involves not just what America does. I'd be great if America pushes out to NATO. I think that's a good move forward. That involves diplomacy instead. But he has to work with all the major superpowers as well. Germany, UK, France, they all have their own military-industrial complex. But the European Central Bank has taken over their currencies, with the exception of UK and the Bank of England. And so it is a very, very complicated negotiation, and they want more aggression. They want to supply an increase in GDP by selling more weapons, by encouraging more war, and engaging in the Federal Reserve printing more money so that money goes back to the German, French, and UK military-industrial complexes as well. So anyway, it's complicated. Remember, we've always said China put forward a 12-point peace plan. America just needs to go back to those principles, and Trump hopefully will do that. And I think it will use all of the leverage it can with this trade war with China, because Trump has said the real enemy is China. But hopefully this is just strong arming in order to move to a world where we trade with each other, because this all ends if America and China start trading with each other again, and we recognize that sanctions were a failed experiment, and we don't allow the deep state to take all the profits from the creation of the dollar and have this network of central banks through the Bank of International Settlements that's driving this proof of weapons network that is causing so much inflation and causing civil unrest as well. As I said, it looks like about 1 million are dead so far for the profits of the proof of weapons network. It is also driven, remember, Russia closer to North Korea. They're using Russia as a training ground and Ukraine as a training ground. As North Korea essentially became a very important ally for Russia because sanctions drove Iran, North Korea, and Russia closer together to support the military of Russia. And then that's led to supporting the economies of Iran through drone creation, supporting this beta essentially of drones and this beta of North Koreans being tested in Ukraine in order to create a stronger army, because US will never send troops, cannot send troops, never should send troops. But now North Korea is becoming a stronger and stronger army through Russia, driving people together, which was also a fake war based upon the Cold War as well, which just put indebted America. And don't forget, Trump went to speak to North Korea in the past. So, and the deep state criticized that, saying that he's an agent for it's diplomacy, people. It's diplomacy, people. That's what we need to do. We don't need to regime change. You don't have to go and live in Russia and Iran, but turning Russia and Iran into Syria and returning it to the Soviet Union through fake communism, which is a failed ideology, is not a good idea. And we've moved past that, hopefully. Anyway, as a result of that, Russia and Iran signed a 20-year strategic partnership and an agreement that involves financial support, military support, and economic support as well. It wasn't quite a military guarantee like Russia has signed with North Korea, which is another nuclear power, which is supporting the fight back against NATO, which is supporting the dollar ultimately and creating a de-dollarization resistance. But the two countries are being pushed further and further together as well. Now, that brings us to the Middle East situation. Right. So this Sunday, there is meant to be, there was a ceasefire negotiated in Lebanon. This is so much how long we haven't talked about that. So essentially, there was a ceasefire negotiated. Remember, the fall of Syria was in order to have a way of militarizing through Iran Hezbollah. And Hezbollah was a mechanism for ensuring that Israel never engages in the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank. Now, America bribes Egypt through foreign aid support and injected, after the Arab Spring, the 2011 fake Muslim Brotherhood uprising that led to an uprising and the replacement of a America for Sisi to control the border with Israel and receive like that $18 billion bribe and the IMF loans and the control of the Egyptian pound that led to hyperinflationary environment, so that Egypt is a puppet state for America so that it can maintain the border. And Hezbollah was the resistance to ensure that Israel doesn't ethnically cleanse and push out all of the Palestinians into Egypt that would lead to a direct conflict for the profits of NATO and the military-industrial complex between Egypt and Israel. This was all a situation that was working. But it relied upon Syria allowing weapons to get through Iranian supports to make sure that the Palestinian cause was maintained. And the Abraham Accords, which was a negotiation of the last Trump administration, disrupted that whole thing as well. Now, when Syria fell and the Assad regime fell, I'll go through the geopolitics in a bit, and that will be the final part of this. That changed the whole situation. And so now that there could be no weapons to Hezbollah through Syria because the Assad regime had fallen, immediately it moved to a peace negotiation between Hezbollah and Israel so that Israel could bomb the shit out of Syria in order to demilitarize, so that the US proxy, Al-Qaeda, and the Israeli proxy, ISIS, could then work with the rebel groups that were funded through Turkey, who is a NATO ally and is having inflation through its IMF debt and its NATO partnership, like Egypt, to create this whole movement in order to change the region where Hezbollah can no longer stop Israel in ethnically cleansing and genocide at the West Bank and Gaza. And so we can now have this movement against that. And that was what the fall of Assad was about. And so immediately, if we are to believe that ceasefire meant that this... Something went wrong. Please try again. Oh, AI in Syria doesn't like what I'm saying here. The algorithm is taking everything I'm saying. But anyway, the ceasefire agreement was and stated that the IDF and Israel need to leave Lebanon this Sunday. No chance. So Israel will show that it was a fake ceasefire agreement. It will breach that agreement, and that creates the environment in order for Israel to be able to say, Hezbollah breached the agreement. Look, we got to stay here. And that allows for the escalation so that the Israeli government can try and do what it always wanted to do, which is draw US troops into Israel to protect its agenda of being the hegemonic power to protect the petrodollar in the Middle East, to serve the Federal Reserve's interest of keeping the dollar alive for a little bit longer as well. And so there will be, this is my prediction, a breach by Israel, not Hezbollah, of the Lebanon agreement this Sunday. And you will hear Israel say, oh, ceasefire is because Hezbollah breached it. And so therefore we need to stay here. And that is a escalatory movement because Netanyahu has already sat down with Trump and decided what they're going to be doing to move forward. Right. So that's the first movement on the chessboard. Remember what Lebanon is about. It's got natural gas exploration. It's got it had a coup by the CIA to implement a US first proxy. And then Iran had its proxy, Hezbollah, which was installed in 1982 after the CIA coup and overthrow of the government. And that led to the resistance from the Israeli occupation of Lebanon to destabilize the region. Okay. And my prediction is this Sunday, Israel will not leave. The IDF will breach the ceasefire and it will escalate this Sunday and it will blame it upon Hezbollah. That will be the end of that agreement. That happens this Sunday. We can test next week whether I was wrong or right. Okay, what else have we got? Well, as soon as the Trump administration came through, he showed that actually Biden and the deep state were allowing the genocide to happen, giving Netanyahu everything it wanted, while the UN Council was voting against all peace ceasefires, and America was using its veto vote to pretend it was fighting against Netanyahu, while Antony Blinken and Biden and the deep state were supporting and getting in the way of any peace agreement, because 3 days after what was the hostage swap after October the 7th, there was a negotiation, and Israel never wanted to return the hostages. They wanted to escalate in order to serve the military-industrial complex and prop up the petrodollar and the dollar, which is why this whole thing happened in the first place. And so as soon as October the 7th happened, we had Hannibal Directive. Israel killed loads of Israelis on top of what happened. And we had the interference between America and Israel to make sure there was no return of hostages, but they could destroy Gaza, and they could make sure that the ethnic cleansing and genocide happened. Egypt was meant to take them all in, but Egypt upheld that border because of the bribes of America, and we had that whole friction that happened. Anyway, the hostage swap could have happened, that is currently happening right now with the first one last Sunday, 3 days after, because that's what it was about in the first place. Remember, Israel took in 3,000 Palestinian hostages. October the 7th was taking hostages. Remember, this Sunday, it's IDF soldier women, which are not hostages, that's prisoners of war. And there was this, there were 10,000 now on top of the 3,000 Palestinians that were arrested with no due process, and they are hostages. So there was meant to be this hostage swap. That's what October the 7th was. And then the media was used in order to make you think there was 40 beheaded babies and mass rapes and all the stuff. Make sure you look at Atrocity Inc. on my blog. Look at my blog, watch the Grey Zone documentary, Atrocity Inc., to understand how the media was weaponized to make you think that way as well. Remember, this isn't anything to do with, anti-Semitism. This is just deep state MI6 operations that were set up in order to fool people into wars. Anyway, and Israel is a vital part of that. Not the Israeli people, the Israeli government as well. Right. Well, anyway, we had our first hostage swap last Sunday after the one that happened a year ago under the exact terms that were interrupted and stopped by Anthony Blinken, Biden, and Netanyahu, Smoldrich, Gavir, and made you think all they need to do is return the hostages when they were trying to stop that anyway. So we had the first one this Sunday. Okay. Ceasefire negotiation. 100% it was Trump that made that happen, because Trump did what Biden wouldn't do. He said, Netanyahu, end it by the 20th. Now, yeah, I've taken the money from Adelson and AIPAC and the Israeli lobby. We'll have our agreements of what comes next, but end the war. Just do it. And what Trump just demonstrated is that when US uses force, they can end it overnight. And if Trump genuinely wanted to end this and not do regime change with Iran, then all he needs to do is demilitarize Israel, focused on America first, and stick to the ceasefire agreements and strong arm Iran in order to engage in diplomacy. That can be solved. It can be solved immediately. But will it? Well, Israel has a different game as well, and that's what we need to watch. And Trump did take the money, and he has to do what he did. So, ceasefire happened. Biden, you're a bad actor. You deserve to go to hell. God will do his punishment, whatever he will through you. Thank God you are not here. And now we move on with Trump. We call him out for what he does, but also he has demonstrated that he can show some leadership and end this thing. So he got the ceasefire. Awesome. It was awesome to see the 3 Israeli hostages, the genuine civilians that were returned last Sunday. It was heart-wrenching to see them return to their families. And it was great to see the 97 Palestinians returned to the West Bank. And it was just great to see that, it was that the family had their people returned. This is awful what's happened. And it was very telling as well to show the difference in treatment and what the media covered and didn't cover. Firstly, first observation, the 3 Israeli hostages looked awesome. I'm sure they've been through a horrible experience. I really don't want to say that. But they didn't look anything like the Palestinian hostages that literally they went from dark hair to gray hair to torture to eyes wide open to rape and everything that happened to the Palestinian hostages. And to me, the Israeli hostages looked in good shape. They looked like they were looked after. That is in direct contrast to the 97 Palestinian hostages, which looked like they had returned from hell on earth. They looked in very bad condition. They looked PTSD. They looked traumatized. There was an arrest that happened where during the last hostage swap, Palestinian was released, an activist lady. She had jet black hair, and then she got re-arrested. And now she's got white hair, tortured, and been through all sorts of things that I can only see. We have seen that people in the Palestinian hostages, they've been subjected to torture, they've been subjected to rape, they've been subjected to starvation, and they have been subjected to all of the things that Israel accused Hamas was doing, and we know it's the opposite so far. It also demonstrates everything I've been saying all along that everyone called me anti-Semitic for. The only way to get hostages back is through diplomacy, through negotiations, and by having lasting negotiations. Military force only supports the military-industrial complex, perpetuates the narratives that leads to this fake war on terror by making people hate Muslims and making people want to resist against people that are being fighting for the IDF, for their survival, and this anti-Semitism narrative, which was all a deep state MI6 agenda to scam people into thinking that this was anything else but a complete unethical, immoral thing by the Zionists, Rothschilds, that set up Israel in the first place and escalated war in order to make sure that the British government allowed for this completely immoral and unethical thing that we are still looking for. And so it creates a larger resistance. Now, even the US and Antony Blinken has been saying that Hamas has more people than before, while Israel was telling its people that we've destroyed all of the battalions, that there is 24 battalions and 23 of them have been destroyed. And it shows that the whole thing was a farce. They destroyed all of the hospitals. Egypt was stopping the aid from getting in. They were weaponizing starvation, and America was paying for it. And in the United Nations, they were fighting against all peace treaties. And we know the whole thing was a farce. It was a complete farce, and it has led to the death and destruction, and quite frankly, things that I never imagined I would ever see, that have changed me as a person forever, let alone all the people that have to watch this genocide happen in real time, that has destroyed international law and destroyed the reputation of anybody engaging in the cover-up operation, to the point where journalists are being dragged out of the what so-called free press while they call out Antony Blinken for everything and the crimes that he is engaged in. And nobody's going to get away with it, because people are going to get away with it because of these presidential pardons. And it has removed faith in this whole thing. Nobody can call out what other parts of the world are doing and not have the sheer hypocrisy of what we have learned. All I can say is it must be a part of the plan. And we're here to learn exactly how the world works. And Bitcoin Hard Talk will continue to tell the truth for as long as we are allowed to tell the truth. Right. So the Israeli government does not want the hostages back. Smoldrich, Gavir, Netanyahu pretends in order to say that, but just listen to that. They don't want that. That's why the Israelis are protesting. And what has happened? Since the 97 were released, 67 Palestinians were rearrested. So hostage swap means that they just come back as well. And while we are being told that there is peace in Gaza, what happened? Immediately, Israel breached the ceasefire agreement in the West Bank. Since last Sunday, they killed 10 Palestinians in the West Bank. Trump has now reversed the executive orders, even the good ones that were put place by the Biden administration. What has he done? He's removed all of the sanctions on the Israeli terrorists that are engaging in terrorism in the West Bank by brutally, by state-sponsored terrorism by Mossad and the government and IDF, that are leading to the terrorism and the burning down of people's homes, while there's no due process and they're being arrested again. And so Trump reversed those sanctions. He removed any restrictions on Israeli weapons being used by these completely illegal operations that are happening with state-sponsored terrorism of illegal settlers. He even invited settlers to his inauguration, and Netanyahu came out and said, don't worry, we're able to return to war after phase 1. during phase 2, when as soon as all the Israeli hostages, and this Sunday there's going to be 4 more IDF soldiers returned, which means that they're not hostages, they're war prisoners of war. I want them all returned. But as soon as they come back, they're going to release more people, and then more terrorism is going to happen, and the media is not going to cover a word of it. And then in phase 2, apparently, if we're to listen to Netanyahu, all of the executive orders that Biden put through to stop that, which was good things while he was pretending anyway, let's face it, Trump has given assurances, apparently, if we're to believe Netanyahu's words, that they can just go back to war as soon as the hostages are done as well. So this stuff is not over. There is no Palestinian cause. There is no solution to this. So this is where I really doubt Trump's words. And all of the rhetoric is being pushed that's lies, that if I get assassinated, blame Iran, when we know that any assassination attempts on Mossad operations, exactly what happened to JFK, exactly what happens 9/11, exactly what happened at USS Liberty, exactly what happened with the creation of the terrorism that happened through the blowing up of the King David Hotel, where Mossad agents dress up as Israelis, and the reason that Clean Blake strategy was happened, and the reason why 9/11 led to the invasion of Iran, and the reason why the Cold War led to the fake false flag operations in Afghanistan that went to the profits of the military-industrial complex, and all the lies. This is the same thing. I'm hoping Trump's going to fight against it, but everything I've seen here is not good. He did end it. Credit where it's due. But if he is just giving a facade of a return, then we are still back to that this is not going to lead to the peace that you want to be remembered for. This is going to return to ethnic cleansing. This is going to return to genocide. And remember, the Israeli government has already said, Ben-Gvir said, he's threatening he will leave the government if this does not return to ethnic cleansing and genocide. But what did we see? We did see that Hamas were clearly still in charge of Gaza. Obviously they're engaging in a public display, but immediately after the ceasefire, during the hostage swap, there were thousands of them there, and there was massive support. There were the people that were supporting them, and obviously they, have been planning exactly how this looked. But it also goes into the farce that, this is not people that are oppressing their people. This is a resistance, and there is going to be a firmer and firmer resistance, and you cannot end an ideology through genocide, mass murder, and all the things we have seen. So nothing's ended here. But the hostage swap will continue every Sunday under the terms, and then as soon as they are back, Netanyahu is saying that Trump has guaranteed that they can go back to the original mission, and we will see. Even the US intelligence released that that Hamas actually is bigger than it was before. So what was this all about? We were lied to. I hope you figured that out right now. But what has happened? Gaza's 100% destroyed. There has been mass deaths, way larger than the numbers been reported. Babies are under the rubble. There's tens and tens of thousands of orphans that have no parents. This was never about the destruction of Hamas and return of the hostage. This was a false flag operation. Learn from this shit, because it's happening in America, it's happening in UK, it's happening in Germany, it's happening in Amsterdam. The media is lying in order to fool you into thinking that these things are happening. Israel is a tool for propping up the dollar so that the deep state can perpetuate this fake war on terrorism 2.0 in order to scare the hell out of you and create violence and create civil unrest and prop up the euro dollar, prop up the petrodollar, and prop up what's happening across the region, across the Pacific Ocean, as NATO's drawing China into believing it needs to reunify with Taiwan because they need those chips, and those chips are needed for the AI war as well. Anyway, we know that Trump used leverage to get a deal, unlike Biden. So Trump, congratulations. I won't judge you on what happens next. I'll try and predict it, but I'll judge you on what actually happens. And I'm not liking what I see right now, but you did it, and you deserve the credit, not Genocide Joe. He does want to be known for peace, and that gives me some hope. And so hopefully all these things we're seeing, again, I'm not going to be ignorant. I'm not going to get my hopes up, but I will judge it as it comes. Because I know that petrodollar is needed to prop up the dollar. I know the euro dollar is needed to prop up the dollar. And that requires the continuation of these wars and the destruction of the European economy if they decide to work with Iran, China, and Russia. And so that is a problem. And we need to move to multipolar. And that requires de-dollarization. That requires protecting yourself with Bitcoin. And that requires a competing brick side as well. I believe that this is going to be continued. And there will be a US support. And hopefully it doesn't get there. Yemen are still resisting. And so, the only people that were trying to end the genocide was Yemen. Trump has now reclassified them as terrorists. And so, the Biden administration did declassify them as terrorists in order to go into diplomacy. That didn't work. And so that's been reversed. And they are still creating inflation because the Red Sea blockade still continues, which is pushing up the price of goods, which is a genuine resistance, which does have an impact on the Egypt economy, thanks to the Suez Canal, which is what Israel was for, to make sure that Egypt never reunified with its Arab League in the 50s, years and years ago, which led to Israel killing Americans through USS Liberty to try and drive America into a nuclear war, and why JFK was taken out, because he wanted to stand up against this nuclear proliferation and create peace as well. Anyway, and the Houthis still managed to show that they can get missiles into Tel Aviv at strategic targets. And then we moved into the Syria situation. So that's the last thing that I want to cover in this plethora and this fire hose of information. Do share, do retweet, do like. I'm going to make sure I don't lose my voice. But we did have, during this time off, the overthrow of the Assad regime, and I want to make sure you understand it. This is regime change in Iran and Syria, and the regime change in Iran immediately happened when the prime minister was taken out with the fall of the helicopter, which I think was obviously an operation in order to get Iran to engage in diplomacy. And put together a new nuclear deal, or push them through an Israeli agenda into actually progressing their nuclear power program into a real nuclear program, so that Israel could force US to go to war and bomb Iran bomb Iran, buy it for Israel, so that they can progress forward their nuclear nuke program. They can get the natural gas from Lebanon, Gaza. They can increase the ethnic cleansing, and they can benefit from Iran and Turkey's oil, which is what this operation was about. There are competing interests, but I just want to make sure you understand the Syria situation a little bit, because boy, is it complicated. But the regime change started, from my perspective, when I follow the money, when the prime minister of Iran was taken down, and they said it was weather on a helicopter. No. CIA operation, Mossad operation, and this was about escalation. And you need to understand that. And this is also part of the Trump assassination attempts, I believe. And I believe that we need to make sure we follow the money and get to the bottom of those as well, because I'm hoping that that's not going to reemerge as well. Throughout this whole process, Iran was very restrained. I think that's clear. Now, the media will tell you a completely different story. But this was about pursuing a second nuclear deal. Trump blew up the nuclear deal. The nuclear deal was the negotiation for Iran to open up all of it to inspection so that we can move forward with Abraham Accords. And then Saudi Arabia said, but you got to solve the Palestinian state. Israel will not solve the Palestinian state. So October the 7th happened. Saudi Arabia had to push back. And Israel wanted to make Iran look like a crazy. So they used October the 7th in order to destroy all of the Iranian allies and make sure that America did another war, an invasion in Iran. That's what Israel wanted. US can't do it, but it was propping up the dollar to try and get the petrodollar to continue. And the best thing that can happen is we have a Palestinian solution and America stops supporting Israel with weapons, and then everyone can go through an Abraham alliance, and we can move to de-dollarization for the global south and a nice movement towards dollarization if we don't have this regime change, and the unwinding of sanctions, just as China is pushing forward in their plan as well. Right, okay. Trump could stop this immediately if he wanted. Just stop sending weapons to Israel, the whole thing gets solved. The whole thing gets solved. Israel is forced into stop ethnically cleansing and genociding the Palestinians. That leads to a negotiation around the 67 borders. That leads to a two-state solution. And then everyone can move forward. And then that has a knock-on effect with all the things that I said. And Trump can be remembered as the peace guy. And Trump will be deserved of that reputation. And then he can take on the military-industrial complex, reveal all the files that he said he would do. Arab unity can only happen, and unfortunately that won't happen because Israel won't allow that to happen. So Trump has to stand against Israel in order for that to happen. If he doesn't, and he works with Netanyahu and allows for the ethnic cleansing and genocide to continue in phase 2, then we know that the Israeli agenda will prevail. And that means that this leads to regime change within Iran, which requires US boots on the ground and the exact opposite of what Trump wants to be remembered for. So that's the game as I see it right now. Now, the Arab countries, they can align with BRICS and they can align with the global south. They commit to de-dollarization, but they're playing both sides because Turkey is playing their side. And it needed to make sure it had more control by working with Saudi Arabia to take over the Assad regime in Syria. Syria was a vital part of it. So be careful of what you're being told. Right, what was Syria? Syria was a road for Iran to get weapons to Hezbollah to stop the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Israel on the Palestinians, and that was the way that it worked. It was also a way of cartelling NATO from Russia because it had a port in Tartus, and this allowed Russia to have nuclear submarines that could go out into the Mediterranean Sea in case any of the choke points were used by NATO expansion. And so Syria had to be taken out so that NATO could do more aggression in Ukraine and escalate those wars. Syria is now controlled because it worked with rebels funded by Turkey, and Turkey had its own strategic reasons, and it used leadership by US proxies. Al-Qaeda is a US proxy, which is weaponized and funded by the US. ISIS is an Israeli proxy, which is weaponized and funded by Mossad. And now Al-Qaeda and ISIS, we're talking about leaders, the leader of Syria right now. They did the fact because Assad was so unpopular because of the way he treated his people. And that was weaponized at the exact right moment in order to create a line with the rebels, wipe out the Syrian military to ensure that this new puppet government and regime is put in place, create a narrative that this is good for the Syrian people, and I hope it is good for the Syrian people. They have been through just as much as the Palestinians. You know, this civil war was disgusting. and it was all about propping up the dollar and the Israeli power in order to do that. But now the very same person that is chopping off heads, killing people, is now in charge and told to wear a suit, while the media says we'll give him a chance. Now please go and engage in diplomacy with all the European countries and serve the dollar of the US. And what happens? Syria is now going to be dollarized. Syria is going to be dollarized like El Salvador. I mean, maybe it will have a Bitcoin strategic reserve. I hope so it can free itself from the outside influence. But next, it will be asked to do an IMF loan in order to rebuild a smart city so that the Syrian people can all be surveilled like crazy by artificial intelligence provided by what was created by Israel in doing the beta test on Gaza for its control weapons and its AI-powered genocide as a service and occupation as a service. And we've got ISIS leadership and Al-Qaeda leadership leading the charge and engaging in diplomacy. So the CIA operation, let's not forget that it already had one. It was already published. What was it called as well? Kimball's Sycamore. What was it? Kimball Sycamore or something. That was the operation to do exactly this. Now, remember, Netanyahu created the Mossad Operation 9/11 to justify the clean break theory that led to the detoppling of all Libya, Sudan, Syria, Lebanon, Somalia, and the others that I'm forgetting about as well, and Iraq, of course, as well. So this is just Israel's plan. And that's why Israel immediately came in and literally bombed the hell out of the country to expand its illegal occupation in the occupied Golan Heights. So there were genuine Syrian rebels that wanted freedom against the Assad regime. But they launched a side attack because it was funded by Turkey. And Israel immediately took out the weapons. Israel got its land. Turkey got its land. And America got to continue the takeover of the Syrian oil and the Syrian wheat in order to make sure that its puppet government doesn't get the money, because Syria was self-sustaining itself and implemented a debt-free monetary system independent of the Bank for International Settlements, which required the overthrow of the government to ensure that there was a debt-based monetary system within Syria. And hopefully it can use Bitcoin strategic reserves in order to fight back against that. But the IMF will make sure that it doesn't as well. So to help you understand how that happened, basically the Syrian rebels came into the original city Aleppo, and then they gained territory after territory until they got to the capital, and Assad was left and is now got exile within Russia. Turkey and NATO are basically a new power in the region, exerting their power. They were negotiating with Saudi Arabia. So immediately, Saudi Arabia has been supporting Syria in the rebuild. And so this is the new corridor. Turkey working with NATO, Saudi Arabia working with the deal that it wants, a bit of two-sidedness in order to maintain leverage between dollarization and BRICS, and Saudi Arabia supporting the new regime, which is ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the US proxies, using the Kurds and various other proxies in order to guard the oil and wheat, while new negotiations happen to get dollarization within Syria. Trump wants the Abraham Accords, which is the peace agreement that he said he will do in all his speeches. I hope he gets it, but it requires the Palestinian cause to be resolved, which Israel will not allow to resolve. So Syria now has two proxy wars. It has US and Saudi Arabia, with Russia protecting its border. And it has Russia and Iran, with now Iran retreating which was working with the Assad regime. And so this was a victory for Israel, US, Turkey, NATO. And the reason why Iran is probably engaging in trying to get a nuclear deal instead of increasing nuclear power, which is the opposite of what Israel wants. Israel wants to push Iran into becoming a nuclear power so it can have its power rather than negotiating in diplomacy with America. So now we got that friction, and Saudi Arabia and Iran are in a battle to over who can be the preeminent power in the Middle East, with Turkey and Israel wanting to get that power as well. And the dollar's happy as long as nobody has peace, and it caused to massacres of more and more people. Hopefully, Trump can break this cycle. It's incredibly complicated. Sectarian was weaponized in order to create this civil war in the first place. There was all sorts of different agendas saying, by Hezbollah having to protect the Assad regime, that led to the death of Sunni Muslims. That then is a covert operation. And now when Hezbollah was protecting Palestine, we had the opportunity where Iran was protecting, Shia. And so then the intelligence agency got to weaponize the people against each other because of that and commit atrocities and make sure that ISIS was used in order to invade. There was all of these forces to create the competing war. US then had its proxy base by using the fact that there were these Kurd people which don't have a region. And so you had Russia that was in there in order to protect its nuclear submarines at Tartus. And then it had, let me press a button here. I think there we go. Okay, all right, we're getting to the end. I know this has been a long one. And then Hezbollah was supporting the Assad regime. Turkey was supporting Assad in order to try and make sure that NATO had some power. There was the Free Syrian Army. I told you this is complicated. You can get back to it. The Free Syrian Army is a former army officials of the actual military. This is broken into many different factions. This is designed to confuse the hell out of you, based upon different beliefs. ISIS was representing Mossad. As I said, Al Qaeda is representing U.S. interests, the Kurds are essentially utilizing the fact that this Syrian disruption and refugee crisis was created by creating this disruption in the first place. So just so you know, the Kurds are actually a Marxist communist ideology that are supported by the US, and they are a US proxy in order to fight against a debt-free monetary system in Israel, which was supported by the Assad regime. And so you've got these different factions where the US is pushing communism in order to fight back against that. That's how crazy this war is. And in using the fake war on terror in order to occupy all of the oil, implement sanctions, and make sure that Syria was completely crippled so that you can have an uprising because Assad regime had no money, and then move to more oppressive and more corruption that was starting to treat the Syrian people so badly. So you see how these things are weaponized. Essentially, within Turkey, there is a region where there's a bunch of Kurdish people. 1/3 of the Turkish population has like 30 to 35 million Kurds. And Syria, Iran, and Iraq, they all have their own Kurd populations. And US wants to weaponize these people to create destabilization. But Turkey wants to make sure that there is no Kurdish state. And so America finds itself in the position where it's supporting communism, a communist ideology, in order to make sure that this large group of 30 to 35 million never form their own state. And that's why they're taking the money from US and Turkey in the first place, and Saudi Arabia, when they want to make sure they never have their own state, when they want to create a Marxist communist state within parts of Iran, parts of Syria, and parts of Iraq. So that's the crazy situation. But Turkey doesn't want that to happen. So it then funded this group, the Syrian rebels and HTS, that were aligned with Al-Qaeda and ISIS for Israeli interest and American interest and Saudi Arabian interest in order to overthrow the Assad regime and make sure that Iran and Russia did not have the leverage that it needed. And then Trump gets to say, I got the peace. And then in phase two, either he held the peace by doing a negotiation with Iran, or he gets Israel to increase the genocide in phase two of the ceasefire negotiation. So every Sunday, we will receive more and more hostages and hostage swaps. We'll see more and more terrorism within the West Bank. And then we see what Trump does in phase two. And whether US will unsanction the Marxist communist Kurds so that Syria, sorry, this is so complicated, I know, can actually benefit from the money from the occupation, the illegal occupation of America that took over Syrian oil and wheat, as BlackRock takes over Ukraine, depending on what Trump does in Russia. See how this is all fits together. So if there were any Kurdish state, which America may want to protect its interest, that's an economic disaster for Turkey. And then we have this NATO complication because Turkey would lose loads and loads of revenue. And Turkey actually took in loads of Syrian people after the Syrian civil war. And so who Turkey sees as a terrorist organization, like what's called the Kurdish Workers' Party, KK, sorry to get this complicated, but I want to get it out there. You can watch it go, which is an armed resistance for the independent Kurdish state that Turkey doesn't want to happen, but America might want to happen. And that creates the friction. And that's why they consider them terrorist groups, but America might say these aren't terrorist groups. And suddenly ISIS and Al-Qaeda may not be terrorist groups because the US has decided that this person's in charge of Syria with Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and crazy situation. Never saw that one coming, but US sees some of them. And so that is the friction. And that is where I think Israel will continue to destabilize the region, to prop up the dollar. If there is genuine peace, then those sanctions will be removed, as we've said, and we'll see, exactly the different types of effects that I believe the China peace plan wants to see something. Turkey also supports Palestine, but at the same time, they speak publicly about supporting Palestine, but they allow oil to pass over its ground and get to Israel. Egypt says that it supports Palestine, its people want to support Palestine, but it takes the US bribes in order to allow for the starvation. And now all of a sudden, aid's allowed to get into Gaza because Egypt said so, because US said so, because Israel isn't weaponizing it, but in phase two, it will return to it as well. So you see how this whole thing works. And NATO has often been used by Turkey in order to stop the expansion of NATO. Finland and Sweden want to join NATO, and it was Turkey that stopped that because you have to get unanimous vote. So all of this geopolitical situation, and they threatened an arms embargo and all sorts of stuff. This is why diplomacy has to happen. And this is why the leaders should all be talking to each other, because we are in maximum centralization. And BRICS, maybe backed by Bitcoin, can create some kind of movement against it. And maybe Treasury, by backing and creating a Bitcoin strategic reserve, can use a force against the deep state, against the Federal Reserve, against NATO, and we can get some leverage in the US. And Trump can be remembered as the guy that did create the peace. Maybe we can reverse all these refugee crises and the Syrians can go back home. Maybe we can reverse the fact that you don't need all of this international monetary fund debt that creates central banks printing money. So you get currency devaluation that destroys the local people's currency. Maybe we can get this IMF not being weaponized. in order to implement regime changes. Maybe the 6 million refugees can actually end up going back home. Syrians already lost 500,000 civilian lives as a result of these artificially created civil wars. And that's what we can get to look forward if we can push back against this. But the Syrian politics is complicated. It's now aligning with Saudi Arabia. There's 18 million, I think it is $80 million or $80 billion, maybe $8 billion. I can't remember, sorry, the number. A large amount of Syrian debt is to Iran. We need Iran and Saudi Arabia to normalize. That is the China plan. Israel wants to make sure they don't normalize because it wants to be the power force. And America decides whether it wants to fund Israel, nothing to do with anti-Semitism or anything else, because it wants to prop up the dollar. But the dollar can move to nationalism if it chooses, and we can enter into multipolar, or we can end up with this trade war escalating with these sanctions, with all that stuff, and we can continue on the path that we currently are. Israel, in order to protect that interest, fired 600 bombs within 72 hours to destroy Syria and its ability to defend itself, while it implemented putting its pro-Israeli and pro-US ISIS and Al-Qaeda in charge. US has still got the oil, still got the wheat, it's still got the Kurds and the communist regime there. But maybe Trump will just want to focus on its energy in the Pacific Ocean, because Trump has its next enemy, which is China. And so that's why it may want to focus on Taiwan. It may want to focus on China. So reunification will be the next narrative. We've got to be very, very careful of the trade war between China and what is happening there. The overthrow of a government within South Korea, North Korea aligning with Russia, the fact that suddenly Bank of Japan might increase rates, which we know means that that's a deflationary environment, but that broke the Japan carry trade, which is a weaponization against the Federal Reserve, which might lead to the hiking of rates. The hiking of rates, it can be weaponized against the Trump administration if the Trump administration exposes the deep state, and therefore it can be used to escalate so that China and US enter into this escalation, which draws China closer to Russia and Iran in order to purchase more oil so that artificial intelligence and natural gas can happen, all because we push this trade war and tariff war with China. Hopefully it's strong arming and we get a Palestinian state and we can move forward and Trump can be remembered for everything that he deserves. But there is a big problem. He did promise that the West Bank will be given to the Israelis, which does create a third intifada, and that does perpetuate more violence, which is what Israel wants. And that will lead to more resistance. More resistance will be weaponized. And then we can have, more regime change, which is what really, this is a battle between Israel's interest and what is right for America. But most Americans can't figure that out. China really holds the power. America holds the power. China wants to continue consuming goods. It wants to support countries so that in case America doesn't consume anymore, it can produce the goods. And that's leading to the Belt and Road Initiative. And the CIA is blowing up any country and detoppling any country that wants to work with China, which is what we saw in Pakistan and we saw in Bangladesh and others. So that brings us to where we are today. And so an ultra fire hose of information. Feel free to break this down into chunks. You can use the timestamps. You can just do the Trump executive order, the impacts on Bitcoin. But I think you should understand the macro impacts and the trade wars and everything that's happening and how Bitcoin can protect it, because that impacts the geopolitical sides and everything that we're seeing across the world And I think you need to understand it as one big picture so that you can get ahead, you can follow the money, you can see that we are moving to a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. You need to protect yourself. Bitcoin is the resistance movement against the Federal Reserve. Every dollar that is not in the Fed, every euro that is not in the Euro Proof of Weapons network, every yen that is not in the Bank of Japan Proof of Weapons network is a peaceful resistance, because you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some are going to do really bad and get wrecked. Others are going to do incredibly well. And I want you to be on the right side of the change. We can do it with peace, love, and unity, or we can follow the path of the deep state that wants to profit from the proof of weapons network as we transition. Protect yourself with Bitcoin, own it in custody, self-custody, rather. Own your own money, spend your own money, and recognize there ain't a damn thing that the deep state can do about the 21 million supply, which is why in the end, countries can own Bitcoin, companies can own Bitcoin, you can own Bitcoin. And if the central bank digital currencies can't beat us, they may have to back it by Bitcoin in the end. And if they won't do it, artificial intelligence central bankers will probably do it anyway. You need to protect yourself through the journey. And I will see you this time next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 68. A long one. Enjoy it. Please do like, share, and I'll see you next week. Peace.